Committee will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare recess any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Before proceeding further, I'd first like to make a few comments about how we intend to proceed today. We have previously covered these issues, but I want to briefly remind members for this hearing, it has been a while. Today's hearing is being held by the committees in the committee's hearing room, as well as remotely via Cisco WebEx. For members and staff in the hearing room, I do have an announcement based on guidance from the attending physician dated June 16, 2020. Members, staff, all that is physically present, informed that in accordance with recent guidance from the Office of Attending Physician, masks must be worn at all times during today's proceeding, except when a member is speaking at a microphone. The chair views this as a safety issue and therefore an important matter of order and decorum, and will assert his responsibility to preserve order and decorum with respect to the wearing of masks. Chair's authority to enforce preservation of order and decorum during the committee hearings delves from Speaker's enforcement authority and closed to Rule 1, pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 9, Rules of the House, rules of committees, subcommittees, as far as applicable. Committee chairs have long been responsible for the enforcement of general decorum in their respective committees. The chair would greatly prefer that all present simply uphold the decorum of the committee by complying with reasonable safety standards that are recommended by the attending physician and are respectful of all the occupants of the room. However, failing that, enforcement would include denial of recognition toward members who refuse to uphold standards of decorum. As this is a hybrid hearing, I also want to remind members of key regulations from the House Committee on Rules to ensure a hearing goes smoothly. Members must be visible, on screen for purposes of identification. Joining this hearing, members must also continue to use the video function of today's software platform, Cisco WebEx, as lame as it is, for the remainder of the time they are attending this hearing, unless experiencing connectivity issues or other technical problems. If a member is experiencing any connectivity issues or other technical problems, please inform committee staff as soon as possible so you can receive assistance. Chat functions available for members on the Cisco WebEx site platform for this purpose. Members can also call committee's main phone line, 202-225-4472, for technical assistance by phone. Members may also not participate remotely in any other proceeding that may be occurring simultaneously. It's responsible of each member seeking recognition to unmute their microphone prior to speaking. To avoid any inadvertent background noise, I request a member to keep the microphone muted when not seeking recognition to speak. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I request the member please mute the microphone. Finally, despite this being a hybrid hearing, I want to emphasize that all the standard rules of decorum apply. As the chair of today's hearing, I'll make a good faith effort to provide every member experiencing connectivity issues an opportunity to participate fully. Members will have the standard 5 minutes to ask questions. To insert a document to the record, please have your staff email to the committee's clerk, Mike Twincheck at mike.twincheck@mail.house.gov. This hearing is also being live streamed for the public to view. And I would now recognize myself for my opening statement. Today's hearing is focused on the United States Department of Transportation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, DBE program for short. It's an essential program that seeks to remedy discrimination and its effects on women, minority-owned businesses as they compete for federally assisted transportation contracts. It seeks to ensure all businesses can compete for federal transportation dollars on a level playing field. I'm proud to follow in the footsteps of my friend, former chairman of this committee, Jim Oberstar. There's Jim right there, who was the last chairman to convene a hearing on this subject 11 years ago in 2009. I'm also disturbed that in the 11 years since that hearing, discrimination has continued to plague women and minorities in this country and in the transportation sector. Discrimination is still terribly real in America. And if the events of 2020 have not proven that convincingly enough, I'm confident the overwhelming evidence we've examined for this hearing will at least shut the door on the question as it relates to federally assisted transportation projects. Our committee planned to hold this hearing more than 5 months ago, but our plans were delayed by the rapid spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sadly, the continuing pandemic only underscores the need for this hearing and for the DBE program. It's increasingly clear minority communities and minority-owned businesses have been disproportionately devastated by the virus. Almost 2 months ago, during debate before the passage of H.R. 2 on the House floor, I submitted 30 high-quality disparity studies into the congressional record, including many hundreds of pages of rigorous empirical evidence testifying to the reality of discrimination, its effects on the transportation sector. Today, I ask unanimous consent to insert into this committee's record an additional 10 studies for a total of 40 studies, only a sampling of the mountain of evidence this committee has seen over the years testifying to the reality of discrimination in the transportation sector. I have repeatedly, without objection, so ordered, I have repeatedly pointed to these disparity studies to demonstrate the reality of discrimination and its effects, but it's equally important to note that our committee has received qualitative evidence of discrimination as well. Letters from Dbes certified business owners and other stakeholders from across the country have come to this committee in the last few months, testifying to the importance of the program and to the reality of discrimination faced by women, minority business owners. Some of those business owners and stakeholders are before us virtually today to share their stories, and I thank them for their testimony. The DBE program has been narrowly constructed to combat the discrimination laid out in the evidence from across this country. It is not a perfect program. I'm sure we'll hear more about that today, but I believe it is an essential program if we want to ensure a level playing field for all American businesses wishing to compete for federal transportation dollars. Once again, I want to thank all the witnesses for taking the time to be with us today, particularly in this rather awkward virtual format. This is a profoundly important topic, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. With that, I would recognize the ranking member, Sam Graves, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman DeFazio. And I want to thank you for calling today's hearing to review the Department of Transportation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, or DBE program. We're all here today to examine the DBE program and determine what, if anything, can be done to improve the program moving forward. It's been 37 years since Congress first created the DBE program, which was intended to help small business owned and controlled by those facing discriminatory barriers in the transportation, construction, and airport concessions industry. Congress has recognized the success of the DBE program by continuing to keep it in place and making adjustments as needed. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses as to the progress that we have made towards realizing the goals of the DBE program and what recommendations they have. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the chair of the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, Congresswoman Norton, for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very much appreciate your holding this important hearing, especially this year. We are at a pivotal moment in our nation's history. We are shining a long overdue light on the lived realities of people of color in this country, despite our pledge of liberty and justice for all. Over the last few months, the vulnerability of African Americans, Latinx, Native American, and other Black and brown people has been unmistakably demonstrated as we ride wave after wave of crisis, a global pandemic, a tanking economy, and systemic racism repeatedly manifesting itself. The way in which our nation has failed and marginalized large populations of our citizens, while unbearable to watch over and over again, comes as no surprise to those of us who can feel the prevalence in our experience. I have spent my entire career in Congress and as chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Before that, fighting for equality and seeking to break down barriers so that all citizens have the same opportunities to participate and thrive in our economy and our society. One of the most powerful tools in the field of transportation and construction to assist people who have been routinely left out is the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. This program, when properly administered and enforced, ensures that businesses owned by women and minorities have a fair chance to compete for federally assisted transportation contracts. The need for this program is ongoing and stronger than ever as income inequality in this country, with the pandemic helping it to grow, continues. Today's panel will provide mountains of statistical evidence that show discrimination in transportation construction projects. Mr. Wainwright's testimony documents through rigorous statistical analysis and survey data collected by various agencies the continued need for the DBE program. We are also joined today by individual business owners who have participated in the DBE program. To provide some context for why these surveys and statistical studies matter, let me point to a 2018 study conducted for the Maryland Department of Transportation, whose geographic market includes Washington, D.C. The study looked at, among other things, whether prime contractors who work with minority and women-owned firms as subcontractors on contracts with DBE-type goals ever solicit or hire those same firms to work on contracts without such goals. The answers were stark and stunning. 69% of African-American-owned firms responded that they were seldom or never solicited to work on contracts without goals in place, and 74% of African-American-owned firms were seldom or never hired to work on contracts without goals. For Hispanic Americans, the results were 47% and 52%. For Asian Americans, the results were 56% and 61%. For Native Americans, the results were 82% and 70%. And for non-minority women, the results were 54% and 53%. This is just one regional example, but this pattern repeats itself across the country. In closing, I remind my colleagues that this hearing presents a welcome opportunity to elevate the realities of minority and women-owned business owners, and by holding this hearing today, we ensure that the DBE program and the business owners it lifts up will receive thorough consideration by our committee. We also have the opportunity to learn what policy changes Congress should consider for the continued success of the DBE program. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses, as well as from my fellow members of this committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman DeFazio. I want to thank the witnesses for participating in this important hearing. I want to give a special welcome to my friend, Ms. Jerry Boyer, who is in Southern Illinois right now. I understand Congressman Boss is going to be providing us with your full introduction today, so I won't steal his thunder unless he screws it up. So I'm watching you right now, Mike. But it's great to see you. I appreciate the work you do for Illinois and across the Midwest. The Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, administered by the Department of Transportation, applies to airport construction, airport concessions, and surface transportation construction programs. The program addresses discrimination against minority and women-owned businesses and provides those businesses within the transportation industry an equal opportunity to participate in billions of dollars of DOT-assisted highway transit and airport contracts each year. The DBE program has been successful, and this committee has demonstrated a bipartisan commitment to this program and to promoting full and fair access to transportation contracting opportunities. I commend the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing today. This is an important discussion, important to all of us in the room and those connecting remotely and to the nation as a whole. Mr. Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'd now like to welcome the witnesses on our panel. Ms. Evelyn Williams, President, Dicado. I'll get that straightened out when she testifies. On behalf of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials, Ms. Jerry Boyer, President, Kaskaskia Engineering Group, on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies, Ms. Mary Lerdahl, owner, Emerald Consulting Services, Mr. Farad Ali, At-Large Board Director, Airport Minority Business Council, Mr. Sandy Michael McDonald, Director, Office of Economic and Small Business Development, Broward County, Florida, and Ms. Sandra Norman, Administrator, Civil Rights Division, Virginia Department of Transportation, and Mr. John Wainwright, PhD, Affiliated Consultant, NERA Economic Consulting. Thank you all for participating today. We're looking forward to your testimony. Without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Hearing none. Since your written testimony has been made a part of the record, the committee requests you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes, summarize as best as possible. Before we hear from our panel of witnesses, I recognize Rep. Johnson to introduce Ms. Evelyn Williams. Rep. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank all the witnesses for being present. I want to say that I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Evelyn E. Williams, which is a constituent in Dallas, Texas. She has served as the Chief Financial Officer for Dakita for 26 years prior to transitioning to the President and CEO in 2010. Following and guided by her father, the company has grown unprecedented heights. Under her leadership, the company has continued to thrive in new markets and obtain larger notable projects. Dakita is the largest client in the Dallas area rapid transportation, where the company has managed transit and the NTD data for the last 28 consecutive years. Recently, Dakita completed a prime role as of 49% of the partner designing and managing the construction of the DART's last 3 miles of light rail. And I look forward to her testimony, and thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Rep. Johnson. I now recognize Representative Bost to introduce Ms. Jerry Boyer under threat by Rodney Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm happy here to have the opportunity to introduce our constituent, Jerry Boyer from Belleville, Illinois, as a witness for today's hearing. Ms. Boyer is a founder and owner and president of Kaskaskia Engineering Group. Kaskaskia Engineering Group is a civil engineering and contracting firm that has been recognized on the list of St. Louis Business Journal's largest women-owned businesses over the past decade. Ms. Boyer has also won multiple awards for her leadership. She is an active member of the American Council of Engineering Companies, Associate General Contractors of Illinois, and Illinois Association of County Engineers, and the Illinois Association of Highway Engineers. Ms. Boyer is also an active member within our community, working with Belleville CEO programs and a civil chair and the civil chairperson for the Bell Scott Committee of Greater Belleville Chamber of Commerce. I'm excited to have her give her testimony on the department's Disadvantaged Business Program, and look forward to the insight that she can offer, given her years of success in business and in her community. She's one of the most qualified witnesses, I believe, that is on the panel today, and I appreciate her being here. And I appreciate the fact that giving the opportunity to introduce her. And Rodney, I hope that was good enough for you, because I think Jerry's going to do a great job. And with that, I yield back.
Rodney stepped out, but I'm sure he's in accordance. I think that was very well done, so thank you. We will now move to witness testimonies. Ms. Williams, you may proceed. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify in support of the DBE program. My name is Eve Williams, president of Dakita Enterprises, a 40-year-old African-American engineering firm located in Dallas, Texas. And today, I speak on behalf of Compto, as well as all the DBEs across the nation. I also sit on the APTA Board of Directors, where next month I will become the first African-American female to chair APTA's Distinguished Business Members Board of Governors. My company has been a part of the DBE program since its beginning and is the oldest Black engineering firm in North Texas. Being a female, Black, and a small business in the construction industry has many challenges. Programs such as the DBE program provides us a chance to participate in lead roles, which affords us the opportunity to create minority teams. One success story I'd like to share. Dbes was a 49% partner in a JV team where we designed the last 3 miles of the rail system for Dallas area rapid transit. We saved the agency over $4 million and began revenue service 2 months ahead. The icing on the cake is that 60% of the project was designed by DBE firms. Being called disadvantaged is not a privilege, nor does it sound like a company's goal. And quite frankly, it was embarrassing explaining that to my 25-year-old millennial. What an engaging conversation that followed. The public sector is where firms like Dbes has its greatest opportunity. But please note, if majority companies and public agencies are not incentivized to include firms like mine, they won't. Let me give you a case in point. We were going after a project in a small suburban community near Dallas. I knew about the proposal and because of my strong relationships in the community. The project was much in our wheelhouse, but we reached out to a nationally known local firm that we had worked with in the past. They were not aware of the opportunity. What happened next was shocking, but not surprising. In an email thread that was inadvertently sent to me, I read a discussion that went something like this. Of course, I changed the names here. So I called John to ask if they'd be interested in teaming with us. John informed his boss, Ted. John explained the services and thought Dbes and their company could do well since we had a relationship. Ted asked about the minority participation goal. John told him there was no minority goal. Ted asked John, then why would we sub to Dbes? John reminded Ted that Dbes was the best at what they were doing. Ted told him that since there was no minority participation, dig into the opportunity and we'll just go for it themselves. When John questioned Ted again, Ted told them, hey, we're bigger, just reject the offer. This is when John sent me an email rejecting our offer and inadvertently included the entire thread. The email was so painful and disappointing. There are so many sad storybook episodes regarding blatant discriminatory practices, especially against Black firms. In fact, if you look closer at the minority goals being met today, you more than likely will find that African Americans whom the DBE program was first written for will have the smallest percentages, while other groups have benefited more. Black professional firms are starting to be an endangered species, like the bald eagle wasp. I do want to bring one barrier that you have the power to change. That is the formula in determining personal net worth. It took 22 years before an inflationary adjustment was made to the personal net worth statement in 2011. It is now almost another 10 years and counting. The lack of regular inflationary adjustments could prematurely remove small businesses from the program. One idea I have is to exclude retirement savings from the net worth calculation. Currently, it includes restricted funds such as 401k, which disincentivizes a business owner to save for retirement. So here, I am respectfully asking your consideration to remove retirement savings from the personal net worth calculation. In conclusion, this program is not a handout, it's a leg up. It forces big companies and public agencies to play fair, and quite frankly, without the DBE program, we would be out of business at the expiration date of the last contract in our pipeline. We should be protected like the boss.
They would be able to get her to vote, because I mean, I think in a case like this, it'd be suppressing a vote.
Somebody's transmitting.
Right when I
Thank
said,
you. Just conclude then, Ms. Williams. Thank you. Sorry about that. Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony and your suggestion. Ms. Boyer, you may proceed.
Chairman DeFazio and Ranking Member Graves, thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee today. It's an honor to represent my firm and my colleagues in the nation's engineering industry. And thank you, Representative Dbes and Representative Boss, for that kind introduction. As you heard, my name is Jerry Boyer. I'm president and sole owner of Kaskaskia Engineering Group, headquartered in Belleville, Illinois. We have DBE certifications in Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. I am testifying today on behalf of the American Council of Engineering Companies, the business association of the nation's engineering industry. ACEC represents nearly 5,500 engineering companies nationwide. Our members include very large firms with tens of thousands of employees, and as well as hundreds of small businesses like mine. I want to communicate 3 main points to you today. First of all, DBE programs are essential for helping businesses like mine compete for work. Second, securing certifications in different states and different jurisdictions can be burdensome. And 3, for professional engineering and design-related services, it's important to balance DBE considerations with qualification-based selection procedures. DBE programs have provided me the opportunity to diversify and grow my company within the engineering and construction industry throughout the Midwest. I still encounter discrimination and the historic effects of discrimination, and DBE certification gives me the opportunity to compete for contracts and expand my business opportunities. If we're going to be able to sustain our profession and continue to support the transportation clients we serve, it's imperative that we continue these efforts. Diversification makes our companies and our industry stronger, and it makes us more appealing to the next generation of professionals, which we desperately need to recruit. Federal DBE programs are one tool to bring these goals forward. However, one challenge for DBE firms like mine that work in multiple jurisdictions is the lack of a unified approach to DBE certification. The changes made in MAP 21 to implement a uniform certification application and reporting forms have been helpful. All the states I mentioned before use the uniform application, but they require the entire application at different times of the year. The application must be current to equipment purchases, loans, and anything else a business uses to run their day-to-day operation. This creates unnecessary work for the DBE firm and the public agency, who both have limited time and budget pressures. I submitted for the hearing record a white paper I helped develop with the ACEC Illinois Business Practices Committee. It goes into greater detail on certification challenges and potential solutions to streamline and simplify the process. Lastly, I want to note the intersection of DBE certification with federal and state procurement requirements for contracting for engineering services. Current laws require agencies using federal funds to follow QBS, qualification-based selection procedures for procuring engineering and design-related services. Under QBS, agencies select firms based on their experience, expertise, and demonstrated competence. These rules apply to federally aid highway, transit, and airport improvement programs through various pieces of legislation approved by this committee over many years, which ACEC strongly supported. Current regulations strike an effective balance between the QBS framework and DBE program goals. Contracting agencies are required to give consideration to DBEs, but without set-asides, contracts, or quotas. State and local agencies set their own DBE program participation goals and the method for achieving them, subject to DOT approval, of course. Agencies may use an evaluation criterion for DBE participation limited to 10% of the overall qualifications-based selection criteria, or they can establish DBE participation goals, which can be satisfied through good faith efforts. ACEC supports this approach. It helps to achieve DBE program goals while still emphasizing qualifications as the preeminent factor in selecting engineering firms. Increasing the weight of DBE as a selection criterion or adding specific set-asides, quotas, or mandates will diminish QBS and the successful project delivery that it promotes. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. I'll be happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you, Ms. Boyer. Ms. Lerdahl, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman DeFazio and committee members. My name is Mary Lerdahl, currently the owner of Emerald Consulting Services in the Seattle area. Prior to starting my firm to help DBEs navigate the challenges of the construction industry, I was an electrical contractor for 22 years. I started my firm, DBE Electric, in 2009 during the Great Recession after losing my share of another company as a result of a marital disposition. The firm DBE Electric performed 122 projects valued at over $80 million over the course of 9 years until I was forced out of business as a result of WSDOT, Washington State Department of Transportation's waiver to exclude white women from the DBE program. The waiver was approved by US DOT in 2016 after, in my opinion, a faulty disparity study that included projected revenue from the 2 largest mega projects in Washington State history. From the time the waiver was enacted in June 2017 to mid-2018, my firm's revenues went from $9 million a year to zero project, even with my successful track record. I was the only female contractor in the state that performed complex heavy highway electrical projects, traffic signals, illumination, intelligent transportation, and tolling systems. By September of 2017, a new disparity study showed that white women were not overrepresented, and WSDOT asked US DOT to rescind the waiver on September 11, 2017. I personally made 2 trips to Washington, D.C. to meet with US DOT, Federal Highways, and Terrence Coleman of the Department of Assistant Attorney General's Office, all to no avail. When US DOT finally denied WSDOT's request to rescind the waiver on December 13, 2019, it was far too late to save my business and the businesses of other white women in our state. Because of the DBE program, I participated in building the SR 520 floating bridge, the longest floating bridge in the world, with Kiewit. The contract was a design-build project, and my contract value was $14 million. It was a great example of how a small DBE firm like mine could work together with a large prime contractor to grow, learn, and build a project that all contractors could be proud of. At the same time as I was building the bridge project, I was also working on the SR 99 bored tunnel project valued at $1.6 billion with Seattle Tunnel Partners, a joint venture with Dbes and Tudor Perini. I've experienced many incidents of overt and subtle discrimination in many years, but this one was the worst. Shortly after winning the tunnel project, Tudor Perini purchased Fisk Electric, a large firm out of Houston. At an initial DBE outreach meeting, a Fisk representative blatantly stated that they were only interested in receiving labor-only bids from DBE firms, thus exposing the DBE firms to more risk and less profit from the less risky material purchases portion of the work. A local subcontractor, J.H. Kelly, was brought in to sub out to the 2 electrical firms owned by the joint venture, Fisk being owned by Tudor Perini and CICE being owned by Dbes in Spain, to minimize the appearance of self-dealing. While my firm ultimately performed $977,246 of work on the project, public records show that CICE performed $34,315,556, and Fisk performed $106,057,656. STP solicited bids from DBE firms like mine in order to show good faith efforts, only to self-perform much of the work. I experienced sexual advances while on the project site while supervising my crews. Getting paid was slow and difficult, and begging was necessary, as I always had some excuse. They needed 2 signers who were rarely both there, for example. Finally, while my firm was working on a change order to convert temporary generator power to permanent power feeding refrigerated shipping containers, I experienced discrimination at the hands of Mike Kirshner, a project manager for Tudor Perini. He was pressuring me to proceed with ordering expensive Siemens electrical gear, but my change order hadn't yet been signed for that work, and STP owed me over $80,000 that was very past due. I put in a call to the local electrical union for an electrician to do the power cutover, but the union wouldn't fill my call for labor. I met with Mike Kirshner face-to-face to discuss the ongoing failure of the union to respond to my call. And after looking me up and down in a sexually suggestive manner, he informed me that if I didn't have labor on the job the next day, he would take over my work. The next day, my crews were shut out of the job and my equipment was taken over. I also received a letter from the union that day pulling manpower from all of my jobs, including the bridge project. Fortunately, Kiewit intervened and didn't allow that to happen, so my company lived to see another day. I later learned that Fisk took over my work and that Tudor Perini had colluded with the union to make this happen. My firm finally got paid the $80,000 owed by STP only because of Federal Highway's investigation into WSDOT's mishandling of the DBE program on the project. Tudor Perini has been found guilty of DBE fraud on several occasions across the country and has paid millions of dollars in fines. In my opinion, the only reason Tudor Perini hasn't been disbarred from federal contracting is because of the powerful connection between this company and a certain U.S. senator. In closing, the DBE program is essential to allow small firms owned by women and minorities to compete for a few pennies of the highway dollar. However, it must be administered with strict compliance, starting with Federal Highways Enforcement of CFR Part 26. State and local programs, field compliance need to start from the bottom up, listening to the DBE firms and the field inspectors from each agency instead of from the top down, so the issues can be resolved as soon as possible to avoid business failure due to non-payment and discrimination during disputes. Waivers should never again destroy a DBE firm, separating the DBE communities. Unfortunately, due to human nature, discrimination will probably always be with us, but this program is effective and the committee has an opportunity to strengthen it and make it more accountable and transparent to participating firms and taxpayers. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story, and I'd be happy to share any other information you would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Liddell. Mr. Ali, you may proceed for 5 minutes. Unmute.
Oh, sorry. Ooh, am I unmuted?
Unmuted now.
I apologize for that, Chairman. I had my own feelings about Cisco. Chairman DeFazio, thank you, and ranking members of the committee. My name is Farad Ali, Chairman of the Advisory Government Affairs Committee for Airport Minority Advisory Council. I'm also the immediate past Chairman of the Raleigh-Durham International Airport Authority. Thank you for providing AMAC the opportunity to participate in the committee's hearing today. AMAC was founded 36 years ago to combat discrimination in the airport industry. Since its founding, AMAC has been in the forefront of every national policy discussion concerning this ubiquitous nature of discrimination in the transportation industry, and in particularly concerning airport contracting opportunities for small and disadvantaged business enterprises. AMAC's members include DBEs and airport concessionaire DBEs, non-DBEs, airports and airport officials, and all others who are committed to promoting diversity and inclusion in the airport industry. The DBE authorization by Congress is vitally needed to combat conscious and unconscious bias and institutional discrimination that regrettably minority and women entrepreneurs too often face. To be sure, steady progress has been made. However, our DBEs and ACDBE members regularly attest that without the DBE program, they would be locked out of contracting opportunities. Having served in many capacities with AMAC as board chair and committee chair and as an airport commissioner, I too have had my own direct observation about the additional work to be done. In addition, anecdotal accounts, academic papers and data from recent disparity studies further document the continuing challenge of racial and/or gender bias barriers to full participation. They also point out to ongoing needs for a DOT DBE program. AMAC works consistently with Congress, the U.S. DOT, Federal Aviation Administration, Aviation Trade Organization, and others in resource to provide education and guidance concerning these public policies and best practices to further to redress discrimination and further diversity and inclusion issues. Often we're unwilling to really have candid conversations, discussion about discrimination, but its ongoing present-day manifestations are real. With regard to the government's interest in battling discrimination, equality is core value of our Constitution, and fairness also yields and it will yield great societal benefits. Although there's been growth in the number of minority and women-owned firms in the United States, they continue to experience both direct and indirect discrimination. Examples of this is clear when you look at prime contractors and suppliers, unequal access to capital, bias in bonding decisions, how contracts are structured, RFP experiences, and the government has a powerful fundamental interest in addressing these forms of discrimination. The programs that allow minority and women-owned firms to federally assisted programs are worth millions of dollars. And as you've heard earlier, these businesses are only receiving pennies. But we really do appreciate all the work that has been going on so far. And I'd like to make a few comments of the disparity studies that have been presented for fact of evidence. While this clear progress has been made and many policy battles have been won, it's also clear there's a continuing compelling need for the DBE program. It's far too many instances when women and minorities are denied equal access to opportunities in the transportation space. As noted, we continue to see extreme, compelling statistical evidence of discrimination, and its effect on disparity studies are really clear, and we will present other ideas. For a number of years, this committee has worked in a bipartisan manner to shore up this program by monitoring current discrimination and present-day effects on the past discriminations, as well as legislation modifications for the current program. These efforts have been really important, and I'd like to let members know that these policy gains have been great, but the COVID-19 epidemic has really created even more problems for our diverse businesses. Although in responses the Congress has provided a lot of assistance to small business, they're hindered by these discrimination policies. As I said earlier, these businesses have unique challenges that can be solved by short-term programs like the PPP Act and often funding decisions. ACDBEs will find themselves ill-equipped to participate in programs like the Main Street Lending Program and airport concessionaires, unlike passenger air carriers, air cargo carriers, and associated contracts, receive no explicit assistance in the Phase 3 or the CARES Acts. So I'd like to ask you to look at issues surrounding the DBE program that you look at what can be done in the short term to protect and sustain these businesses that are under this current economic crisis. I thank you for the opportunity to testify before the House Committee, Transportation Committee, and Infrastructure, and upon the groups of thousands of members. I'd like to say thank you, and if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to answer those at the appropriate time.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Norman, you may proceed. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I skipped someone. Mr. McDonald, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman DeFazio, and good morning, committee members. My name is Sandy McDonald, and I'm the Director of the Office of Economic and Small Business Development here in Broward County. I'm also here on behalf of COMTO, the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials this morning, and my office is also a member of the Airport Minority Council. It was an excellent start in 1983 when the provision was made to authorize highway and federal assistance programs to allocate at least the 10% of the funds to be spent with DBEs. In 1987, the program progressed. It included women during the reauthorization. The DBE program as we know it today is one of the most significant tools for guaranteeing the participation of minority-owned and women-owned businesses in federal procurement of goods, services in the arena of highway, aviation, and transit. But we also know we can do more. In Broward County alone, the DBE program accounts for 408 businesses, of which 210 are women-owned. Throughout the state of Florida, there are over 4,000 certified DBEs documented. The significance of the number of DBEs in my county and state is only one important factor to consider. Equally as important are the number of jobs these DBEs provide and account for throughout the state and the country. But yet, we know we can do more. Broward County believes the success of our DBEs come from the additional assistance we are willing to offer in our program. All DBE program administrators are required to meet the 8 objectives of the DBE program under Part 26. However, the following specific objective, to assist the development of firms that can compete successfully in the marketplace outside the DBE program, is one we put extra emphasis and apply to grow our minority and women participation, and yes, grow our overall economy. The DBE program in Broward County develops and directly affords our minority and women-owned businesses the chance to perfect their craft, realize their growth, build capacity, and nurture relationships that can carry them far beyond a single contract. Growing through the process for a DBE is invaluable. Whether they win or lose a specific bid, it allows them to create relationships that lead to partnerships that have the potential to result in future contracting opportunities. And it's that potential with our primes we want to build on even more. Providing this opportunities throughout Department of Transportation contracting for minority and women-owned businesses goes far beyond the one single contract. It is imperative that a DBE program achieves the outlined objectives. It is these objectives that provide opportunities for DBEs and are the standard that DBELOs, such as myself, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Liaison Officers, and myself and others have to govern our programs by. We recognize that there is always room for improvement. We accept the challenges that arise as opportunities to expand on the original intent and to continue the purpose of the program. I have seen the professional growth of DBEs over time, I have witnessed the evolution of business owners with an idea who started operations in small residential markets and then expanded to commercial markets and prepared themselves for government procurement. I have certified businesses who met all the eligibility criteria for DBE participation, but were not familiar with government bidding or establishing professional relationships. I have worked with established DBE businesses who have used their talents and experiences to grow their business beyond my county and beyond my state, and to provide their service in multiple states. I have also unfortunately seen those businesses who were not given the opportunity this program should allow. We can actually do more. The DBE program affords minority and women-owned businesses the chance to start, develop, master their abilities, and grow beyond their initial footprint and the program. For this reason and many more, the DBE program needs to continue for an additional 37 years and beyond. While my office in Broward County continues to find more ways to increase our DBE participation, while focusing on successful contracting awards to DBEs, we also pay attention to the areas where there are opportunities to grow and embrace the challenges that could make this program even better. The success of our program and the impact it has on the local and state economy is an ideal example of the importance of the DBE program to drive equality in the field of transportation. And yes, I will say, without question, COVID has impacted our community in the worst way, and we believe the DBE program will be one of those starts that helps us to bring our community back and support the minority and women-owned businesses. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. If while you're testifying, if you're wondering why I'm looking over there, somehow some people show up on that screen and some people only show up over there. So I don't know, I would hope if our tech person is listening, when someone is speaking, if we could pop them up on the main screen so we can just look forward. With that, Ms. Norman, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be a part of this process, and I'm very honored and pleased to appear before you today. My name is Sandra D. Norman. I'm Division Administrator for Civil Rights for the Virginia Department of Transportation. As Director, I know firsthand of the DBE's program's importance that is within your jurisdiction. I'm very supportive of the DBE program that assists minority and women-owned businesses who are ready, willing, and able to compete and perform contract work as either a prime contractor or a subcontractor. I believe it is the right thing to do. It continues to drive equality and inclusiveness. The DBE program for the United States meets constitutional tests. Every court has held that the DBE program regulations at 49 CFR Part 26 are constitutional. Why is the DBE program important? Here are some of my thoughts for you to consider. The DBE program has its roots in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It has been regulated through a series of reauthorization legislative initiatives. The DBE program applies to airport and surface transportation, highway, transit, and aviation. The DBE program has been enacted by Congress to address historical discrimination against minority-owned firms in the transportation industry and to ensure that minority and women-owned businesses have a fair chance to participate in contracting opportunities made possible by federal financial assistance. The DBE program, with its rigid certification requirements, presents an excellent opportunity for a win-win for all parties. It is a success for VDOT and a success for the community. We want the residents of those communities to benefit from the public investment in that community. The majority of employment growth in the United States comes from small businesses. When small businesses are allowed to do contract work, it is an opportunity for people who might have been excluded from the relevant workforce to showcase their talents and skills, get trained, and work within the transportation industry to have more employment opportunities in the future. Advancing diversity and making money are not conflicting goals. It is good for business and good for society. DOT's DBE program is as relevant today as ever to level the playing field in transportation for individuals, businesses, and communities of race, color, and gender. Our country suffers when talented people who have new ideas and who want to work hard are denied the opportunity to compete because of their ethnic background, race, or gender. And that is why there is a continued need for the Disadvantaged Business Program, a need to ensure that small businesses can compete fairly for federal funded transportation-related projects. The DBE program, independent of inherent challenges and the nature that comes with those challenges, has provided opportunities for minorities and women-owned small businesses and other contractors to participate in an arena that has historically not seen such participation. It has allowed people to create jobs and give their employees a quality of life which they would not have been able to do so before the DBE program. So, independent of all the challenges, the right part of the program is access. Access to many construction projects that use governmental money that will have a requirement with a designated percentage of the total contract values awarded, making sure they're awarded to the DBEs. This allows access to DBE businesses that may not have been able to compete on price with larger operations to win contracts on projects. In addition to the financial benefit, contacts are made with respective industries that may lead to additional work. It's about people. It's about jobs. And too often, we forget that our industry golden nuggets are the people who participate in the DBE program, our small businesses, and the thousands upon thousands of people they employ. Oftentimes, we forget that the faces behind the businesses also want to leave a legacy for their children, grandchildren, and for generations yet born. In closing, the success of DOT's DBE program depends on the rich diversity, skills, and talents of our DBEs. BDOT as an agency will continue to serve as a model DBE program to ensure that minority and women-owned businesses have a fair opportunity to participate in contracting opportunities at VDOT. Therefore, we're committed to championing and strengthening our DBE program. It is the real-life stories of discrimination for minority and women business owners that are vital to assisting courts, policymakers such as yourselves, and the public to understand the need to preserve and improve the government DBE program that help to drive equality and inclusiveness within the US DOT DBE program. Again, I'm honored, and thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Norman. Dr. Wainwright, you may proceed for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, members of the committee, good morning. I appreciate the invitation to appear here today. My name is John Wainwright. I hold a PhD in economics from the University of Texas at Austin. Until my recent retirement, after 24 years, I served as a managing director at NERA Economic Consulting. My primary career focus has been analyzing the effects of discrimination on minorities and women. My written testimony contains 90 pages of analysis conducted and compiled for this hearing. I will attempt to summarize. I've performed extensive original research using 95 existing disparity studies, as well as data covering millions of firms from the Census Bureau's Survey of Business Owners, the Annual Business Survey, and the American Community Survey. My testimony is a continuation of similar research I've performed over the course of my career as an economist. I conclude that there is strong evidence, both past and present, of large, adverse, and statistically significant disparities facing minority-owned and women-owned business enterprises in the United States. Moreover, these disparities cannot be explained solely or even primarily by differences in factors that are untainted by discrimination. In other words, these disparities are primarily due to discrimination and its destructive effects. I reach this conclusion from three main sources of empirical evidence. First, disparity studies overwhelmingly demonstrate adverse findings for minority and women-owned businesses. The vast majority of the 95 disparity studies I reviewed in my testimony identified large adverse disparities affecting minority and women-owned businesses in both construction and professional services like architecture and engineering. In construction, 72% of disparities were adverse, and 81% of those were large and adverse. In construction-related professional services, 77% were adverse, and 97% of those were large and adverse. I'm confident that if a similar analysis were conducted with additional studies, such as the 40 that have been introduced into the record here today, it would reveal similar results. Second, census data shows large adverse and statistically significant disparities. The most recent complete census showed that for every dollar of sales and receipts earned by non-minority male-owned firms, African Americans earned just 34 cents, Hispanics just 47 cents, and Asians just 47 cents. American Indian and Alaska Native-owned firms earned just 43 cents. Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander-owned firms earned just 49 cents, and women earned just 41 cents. Third, statistical regression analysis shows that historical and current disparities are largely due to discrimination. The most recent American Community Survey shows that the rate of business formation for African Americans would be 120% higher in the absence of discrimination. For Hispanics, the figure is 41%. For Asians, 30% higher. For American Indians and Alaska Natives, 43% higher. For Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders, 58% higher. For women, 44% higher in the absence of discrimination. In closing, there is still some good news. As my testimony shows, and as you've heard today from the other witnesses, although severe disparities persist, we are making progress thanks primarily to public efforts like the DBE and ACDBE programs. Still, now is not the time to reduce our efforts to eliminate business discrimination and its effects. Indeed, the evidence is overwhelming that if we eliminate or reduce these programs, much greater disparities will very quickly occur. The best metaphor I can offer is to consider someone like myself who takes blood pressure medication. If you take my blood pressure while I'm on my meds, it will read as close to normal. Obviously, that does not mean that any responsible doctor would say it's time to stop taking my medicine. This is precisely why I and other researchers in this area try to examine both public sector contracting markets where affirmative measures like the DBE program are found, as well as private sector contracting markets where such programs are rare and consequently discrimination remains almost totally unremediated. The bottom line is this: despite admirable progress, discrimination and its destructive effects are deeply rooted in the American economy. Such discrimination makes it immeasurably harder for women and minorities to form and grow their own firms. This reality has innumerable harmful consequences for our economy and for our nation. For all these reasons, I strongly urge you to reauthorize the DBE program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wainwright. A good summary of 90 pages of comprehensive research. So thanks very much. But your full research will be entered into the record. So now we'll proceed to questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the witnesses. I'll first begin by recognizing myself. Ms. Boyer, in addition to your testimony today, you sent a compelling letter to the committee, when the committee reauthorized the DBE program in H.R. 2 earlier this year. I ask a unanimous consent to put this record in the letter without objection. You detailed experiences there with discrimination throughout your career. And you said it was only because of the DBE program you were able to start your business, grow your business in the face of that discrimination. And one quote was, "Even though I've been in business for 14 years, won several statewide awards for my engineering, I still cannot compete with established engineering firms owned, managed by white males. I have participated in many equity surveys, discussions, and the question always comes up about the need for this program to continue. I can testify that without this program, the work I get on federal and state infrastructure projects would cease. The only reason other firms team with me is because I'm a certified DBE firm first, and then because I do excellent work. I'm not their buddy. I don't look like them." That's pretty compelling, Ms. Boyer. You stand by that quote?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty sad. Ms. Williams, would you agree with Ms. Boyer's assessments in these matters?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that really underlines why we're here today, why we're reauthorizing the program, and also looking at ways to make the program work better. Dr. Wainwright, when you, at the end of your testimony, you mentioned the private sector study versus the public sector with the DBE program. Can you give us a rough quantified comparison of, in any way, in brief? I know that you go into it in more depth in your study, but Dr. Wainwright, still there? Yeah, I see over there, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Can
Well,
you,
I mean, you concluded, the private sector versus public sector, and you're doing these comparative studies. I mean, in aggregate, is there any way, can we say, it's a small percentage of the work overall in the public programs. What percent is it where the public programs with DBE aren't? How much smaller is that?
Oh, sure. I think I understand now. Sorry.
Yeah.
The public sector as a share of the overall economy is maybe 20%. So the DBE program and programs like it throughout the country are, to some degree, a finger in the dike. You don't see these programs very much at all in the private sector. So you've got the DBE program and programs like it trying on their own largely to remedy discrimination and remediate discrimination with only 20% of the economic activity to work with. The other 80% remains practically untouched.
Great. That's what I was looking for. I didn't know what the comparison was. So 20/80, and then we get a fraction of the 20. So
That's cool.
Thanks. Anybody else? I've got about a minute left. Anybody else want to expand on their remarks for about a minute? Okay. Not hearing anybody. Go ahead.
I would.
Sure.
I would just like to, this is Mary Lairdall again. I would just like to reiterate the importance of waivers and the effect that they have on hurting DBE firms, that while they may have enjoyed some success within the DBE group, they are still far from being ready to be kicked out or graduated from the program. I think also that in our state of Washington, the waiver that was enacted to exclude white women actually really separated the DBE community and actually pit one group against the other, which of course, it's the last thing that we need. We want to bring DBE communities together. And they're, just by the numbers of statistics, there will always be one group that's going to do better in any particular data segment than another. But overall, the DBE community still is just getting pennies of the federal highway dollars. So I would like to submit that the committee consider that waivers should never be enacted against one group or another. They're very destructive, and they're not necessary. In our state of Washington, because we are covered by the Ninth Circuit District of the court decisions, I realize that the state of Washington had the opportunity to ask for a waiver, but it was not required that they seek a waiver. And that's an important distinction that I hope that the committee would perhaps consider writing into the reenactment, that never again that waivers would waiver out one group of the DBE community than the other. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that observation. Now I would turn to Ranking Member Graves for his questions. Oops, nope. He's not there. It would be Representative Weber will ask.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions for Fareed Ali. And I'm not sure how we get him up on the screen. I guess we look to whoever this speaking part is. Mr. Ali, does the DBE program assist minorities in attaining financing?
Thank you for your question. I've been also the executive director of the Small Business Transportation Resource Centers. That's through your that's through your NCDOT funding. In that program, part of the milestones are to provide technical assistance and access to capital, or so resources for them to get that access to capital. But the program doesn't actually provide the financing. You have to go out and find sources. I will tell you, in my work, I've seen that we've had to go out and find specialized or people of color or women to support this group, to help them to show a duty of care to make sure they can get the financing and the bonding necessary to participate on roadside projects as well as ACDBEs. You also do see some institutional discrimination in that work, from allowing people to show duty of care and helping others.
Are you able, when that happens, do you have a matrix? Are you able to track how, from each project or each company, how good it went, what the pitfalls were, and how to improve upon that?
Yeah, thank you. Great question again, Congressman. In our program, what we would do is look at some of the ways that weaknesses in the DBEs, or that we may see that are important. We find ways to strengthen it, if it's on asset base or if it's credit or whatever it may be, to help them to get the financing. Again, the financial system is not always treated ACDBEs or even DBEs fairly. And it's hard to speak to this because I know in the banking system or the financial system, there's the rules of way people operate. But it is also the ways that people have culture in allowing people to feel like they can have opportunity. So we do measure when people actually look for financing opportunities, figure out ways to help them to overcome any obstacles, and then success in getting them financing or bonding needed to meet the requirements of the project. The answer is yes.
Okay, that's good to know. And then I'm going to jump over to Ms. Sandra Norman, if I may. Ms. Norman, what would you say, in your experience, is the biggest obstacle to increasing minority participation in transportation-related projects in your state?
I would say, as you just talked about, access to capital. The other part too is how we procure projects, making sure that our DBEs have the opportunity on the design side of the house as well as the construction side of the house. So making sure that we do set aside some smaller bundle projects so that the small business DBEs will have that opportunity to compete and win contracts. We just don't want them to compete for it. We want them to win the contract and be successful in carrying out that from beginning to end, making that project win for both the DBE and for the DOT.
So it's kind of a follow-up, I guess, with my question, Mr. Ali. Do you have a process, Ms. Norman, with the way you're doing it? I mean, is there a hotline for help set up? Do you encourage participation? Do you reach out and get feedback from them, I guess?
Just like Mr. Ali, we do have what we call the BOW Center, the Business Opportunity Workforce Development Center. It's through a supported services program. We do provide technical assistance. And one of the things that I do a lot of outreach, a lot of network through different entities, through different partnership with state, local programs, so that our DBEs will have that opportunity. But sometimes the requirements for our DBEs are much stricter and harder for them to have that level playing field with regard to access to capital. But to your point, yes, we do provide technical support and assistance, make sure that we do have partnership opportunities for our DBEs.
Well, thank you for that. I've been kind of setting the stage for you, Ms. Lerdahl. You're the last one up. I'm quickly getting close to my time, and I appreciate the chairman's indulgence. Since you've run a company, Ms. Lerdahl, you've heard the panelists, especially the last two that I've had questions for. From your business experience, would you be able to give them suggestions? Maybe you want to hire on as a consultant, I don't know. But would you be able to give them suggestions on how to better help these companies, successfully compete on these jobs?
Yes, thank you. Well, I do think they touched on the importance of access to capital. I will state that in the 9 years I was in business, I was never able to obtain a line of credit except for the one project that was provided through the Small Business Transportation Center. I was able to get a $250,000 line of credit to do one particular project. So that really did help. But the rest of my work, $80 million worth of work, was done without a line of credit. So I became a really good bill collector. Otherwise, I couldn't survive. I do think, too, there's definitely not only in the banking segment discrimination against small business and particularly women and minority-owned businesses, but also with creditors. I was not able to get the pricing on big loads of material, $500,000 pole orders, for example, that my larger contracting competitors could. So, and there was a few times I tried to pursue collusion within the supplier network, and that was a very difficult thing to prove because, of course, if they're not going to bid to you, how can you prove that they are stacking the deck against you? I do think that there's also evidence of supplier fraud, whereas even, unfortunately, DBE firms that are a supplier up the pricing of a package of materials on bid day to a non-DBE electrical firm or other firm in order to win the bid because they can count 60% of that bill of material. So that, again, stacks it against the DBE. It's almost the DBE supplier working against the DBE contractor. And so there's a lot of games that get played in the supplier DBE industry, unfortunately, as well as access to credit in both the supplier and banking forum.
Well, thank you for that. It sounds like you'd be a good resource for the other folks on the panel on, working on some of the pitfalls that a lot of these business owners see. So I appreciate your indulgence. Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
I thank my good friend. And I recognize myself for the next series of questions. I think I want to start with Ms. Williams and Ms. Boyer, because I'm interested in why this discrimination continues to occur. Now, you would have the same ability, even more experience, if the DBE program went away. So I'd like you to elaborate on why you think opportunities for small businesses like yours would dry up. You all seem to have testified to that effect without the DBE program. I'm trying to find whether there is a real remedy here that is lasting. For example, do you think that these contracts are based on personal relationships that these companies have? Is it based on the size? They prefer larger companies? Is it based on the nature of the competition? Indeed, are they competed? Trying to get at the cause of what you have, virtually all of you have elaborated as continuing discrimination, notwithstanding the DBE program. So I would start with Ms. Williams, I guess.
Thank you so much. I think that one of the unintentional consequences of the DBE program is that we have set ourselves up, or the program is set up to invite and encourage the checkbox. In other words, you have to check the box in order to win. So if I'm a large majority firm, and the goal is 25%, I'm looking for a DBE and I have to check the box. If I'm a large majority firm, I want to get 51 to 60% of the project. And so if I can give out, I got to give out 25. I mean, it's all in the numbers. And so I think that if you graduate or you weren't a DBE, they would not pick you as just a good engineering company, so a professional service company, because you don't check the box. So unintentional consequence that the DBE program has developed, but it is what it is.
Ms. Boyer, do you have any views on this?
Yes. Of course. So thank you for the question. Excluding the city that I live in, and I've headquartered in Belleville, Illinois. They give us work because we are right here in their community, serving their needs, going the extra mile all the time, and we do excellent work. And it doesn't matter if I'm a DBE here, because this is where I work, and this is and they know me. So I think a lot of it has to do with relationships, although it's also about the culture of our nation. And so even though I work with large engineering firms and we give work back and forth all the time, I think for us in Illinois, it has more to do with the Illinois Department of Transportation really emphasizes that they want DBEs to succeed, and they want prime firms to be giving DBEs chances to lead. And they know the only way that they're going to win the work is to work with DBEs, because that's what the state wants. So it's all about winning. It's all about getting a leg up. And if a firm, I say non-DBE firm, thinks that they're going to have a better chance to win with a DBE, then we're great. Even if we do fantastic work, they won't use us if they don't have to, because it's all about winning the most. It's all about this individual culture that we have in the U.S. is that the more for me, the better. And the only way people are going to share is if they're made to share. I hate to say it.
Interesting to note, says a lot about the importance of continuing this program, because you would think automatically these firms, women and minority-owned firms, would work their way into the industry. Ms. Leto, I must say your story was particularly chilling to me about the problems of women business owners. And I'm trying to find out the difference between waivers and graduation from the program. I am confused on that. What is your response for those who believe that that the program should exclude automatically certain groups once they have attained what is known as parity in the market?
Well, thank you for that question. It's a great one. First, big difference between graduating and the waiver. The waiver sought to exclude white women as a result of a disparity study that, again, had some unusual data in it with these two big mega projects where billions of dollars of contracts with multi-years of work were counted in that 2009 to 2011 study data period. Other firms, ironically, the two biggest firms in our state, one is Valley Electric, one is Elcon Electric, both used to be DBE firms, but they were allowed the time and the length and the runway to grow and to graduate from the program. Elcon's owned by an African-American gentleman, and Valley Electric was owned by a woman-owned minority or majority business. But they had, 10,
They're not
12,
in the program
15 years.
any longer? They're not in the program any longer? Those
No,
two firms?
they actually they graduated from the program.
Okay.
But in the case of a waiver, we were essentially kicked out by our own agency because of the disparity study data that indicated that white women were getting more than our share of the DBE dollar, which is absolutely not true. So my company barely got its feet under it and started to do some great projects like the 520 bridge. And then I was completely cut off at the knees. And I would also concur with the other ladies that talked about not getting work without being in condition of award. I bid from the time that the waiver was enacted in June of 2017. I bid hundreds of projects. I pulled out every networking. I begged, I pleaded. I mean, I had never not finished a job on time or ahead of schedule. I had done multiple millions of dollars worth of work, never with a problem. And I could not get a single job. And that is because discrimination is even more real than I thought. And I've been in business for 22 years. I had a great reputation in the community, not only as a DBE firm, but as an electrical contractor. I had been in business for 10 years prior to starting my own firm in a non-DBE firm. I knew everybody knew me, but I couldn't get one job to save my company. And that's why my company died a death of 1,000 cuts over 18 months, $9 million a year to nothing.
Thank you. My time has expired. I do note that you cited two firms that had graduated from the program. I would hope that if we have this hearing again, we will invite at least one firm that has graduated from the program so that we can learn about what the program does for people to put them on their own. I think that would have added a great deal to this hearing. I'm pleased now to recognize Representative Dbes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks again to all the witnesses. Ms. Boyer, I heard that Mr. Boss did a fine job with your introduction while I was absent.
Yes.
I do want to start my question with you. Based on your experience, do you believe that a mentorship program between prime contractors and your company, like your company Kaskaskia Engineering Group, would have been helpful to you when you first became a business owner?
Obviously, the mentor programs are so beneficial, and getting started and even just getting into different forms of work. So I've actually participated with mentor programs in both engineering and on the contracting side. The problem with mentors is programs is it takes a lot of administration, both by the companies and by the agency. And there's so often that the follow-up and making sure that it's really happening falls through the cracks because people are short-staffed and they're just too busy. But mentorships do work when there's enough staff to make it work.
Great to hear that. Another question for you. Has either the DBE program's personal net worth or the gross receipts limitation factored into your decision-making when considering new business opportunities?
Absolutely. It's a strategy. I know right now that that I could not survive if I graduated out of the DBE program right now. I don't have, my foundation is not deep enough. And so, yes, it has everything to do with the decisions that I make. I need to stay in the program right now because I have 45 mouths to feed here.
Would you be more interested in getting off, making more dollars available if there was a better off-ramp to move towards self-sufficiency?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I actually looked at with a firm in Minnesota as they were graduating out of the program is to form a joint venture with them, a joint venture company in a sense that would go after federal work there and share the work, me being the DBE, but giving them like 40% of it to kind of pad them as they graduated out of the program and built and sustained themselves. In the end, we couldn't come up with an agreement. And I think that, there's a lot of problems right now with staffing engineers. There's a huge shortage. And I think the close relationship scared them that their people might like our firm better and have some people move over. So they decided not to do it with us. But I think that just the exercise of looking at how can you stabilize a firm as they jump out of the program and teaming with another DBE to share work back and forth could lift both firms. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
It's great to hear that the program's been so successful for companies like yours. I think some of the things you just mentioned, Ms. Boyer, could make the program better. And we look forward to working with you on those issues. I know that this program has meant a lot for you and your company. We heard about that in your opening statement. And I just wanted to give you another chance. Is there anything that you haven't yet said about this, this having an impact on you and your life that you'd like to mention to us in the committee?
Well, you certainly would never see a mother-daughter engineering firm. And this program has made that available.
Well, that is wonderful.
I also do want to say that this idea of a unified certification is so important. And, we have a lot of stuff going on in the United States right now. We have the DBE program, but we also have a lot of people trying things. I mean, like our utility companies are trying to come up with their own DBE programs, and they've separated out women and minorities. And so when I only work in 7 states, I have to get 17 different certifications, and it just seems like that we're far enough along in our electronic world that we could have one place, one repository, and that we could certify DBEs in categories of women or minorities so that everybody doesn't have to do the same thing over and over and over. It takes one full staff member of mine to just keep up with this. So I think it can be simplified, but it takes that our agencies to trust each other. And the Small Business Administration does a great job. They're the perfect candidate for something like that.
That is another great idea. Look, we know and we see the emotion that you've shown us, how much of an impact this has had in your life. Thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you in person again soon, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman has yielded. I must say I was very touched to hear the testimony about a mother-daughter engineering firm. Typically, we see businesses like this passed on to sons. The notion that you had that effect within your family is telling about the importance of this program. I appreciated that, hearing that very much. We will next hear from Representative Larson. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Ali. It's clear the pandemic continues to have a significant impact on the U.S. aviation industry, particularly on airport concessionaires. Even more concerning is the fact that minority-owned small businesses are disproportionately impacted by the effect of the pandemic. Could you cover for us how the pandemic has affected AMAC members and airport concessions disadvantaged business enterprises?
Oh, yes, thank you, Congressman. It's really important to understand the process of how these work. When you look at an airport, I look at it really as a hotel, and big concessionaires, which are mainly foreign-owned, secure pieces of the airport and to be able to provide services for their passengers. And as you've heard earlier, a lot of the DBEs, the status of DBE allows for them to partner with other minority and women-owned firms. And many of these concessionaires, these large concessionaires, look for women and minority-owned firms to participate, and that's how they get a pathway into being concessionaires, either from street side to airports or even beginning new businesses. A lot of the investment for these airports, as you could see, the improvements inside of the airport are improvement in shared costs by DBEs. So they're making investment in public assets based on a contract for 5, 7, or 10 years, and they have to pay those loans back typically to their master concessionaire. So when you have the COVID crisis, which took down 90% of the travel, a lot of these ACDBEs are now having to still make payments, which are not being received. And because they made them in public assets, they can't get traditional funding, which is really hard, because then if you can't get traditional funding from a bank, there's no way you can refinance or restructure your loan. And as a result, you find yourself in a cataclysm of debt, of not only business debt from the pandemic, but business debt from being able to pay back your loan. So not being able to get access to the PPP, it didn't help these businesses, ACDBEs, and some of them weren't able to get the EIDL loan because the EIDL loan, which was once at $2 million, went down to $150, but a lot of these businesses needed an EIDL loan so that they could continue to cooperate and manage inside of these airports. So you find a lot of the concessionaires are in default, which means they're in a position where they could be eliminated from these contracts that they needed, and whatever assets they had tied up would be lost.
Yeah. And what effect would large-scale closures that of the concessionaires have on airport operations?
I think large, it would it would do a whole lot of things for airport operations. Thanks for the question. If you look at these ACDBEs or these DBEs that would be eliminated from contracts, they'll lose these opportunities. You'll have societal impacts to them, where these communities that look to these DBEs for support or hiring, so they lose all these employees. These employees would lose houses. I mean, the trickle down effect of ACDBEs going out of business or DBEs going out of business. Please note, if you look at some of the statistical analysis, most DBEs hire people of color or women than any other constituency groups. So when they go out of business, it has a real trickle down effect into either the communities and the airport community.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Mr. McDonald. So, Mr. McDonald, I'm the chair of the Aviation Subcommittee and certainly acutely aware of the lack of diversity in U.S. aviation and the need to attract new talent to ensure that this industry remains competitive. In the time I have remaining, which is about a minute, I think, can you discuss some of the successful initiatives that you've implemented within the DBE program that has attracted more participation from women and minority-owned firms, particularly related to aviation?
Yes, I would say that through our community partners, again, I'm with the Office of Economic and Small Business Development. And because of that, we have community partners. We have a group called the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance that works with the attraction and the retaining of businesses in our county. And through that group, we've also have a cohort of aviation type businesses. But from education and training and apprenticeship, we've been able to create a collaboration where we attract not only those businesses, but we engage those business opportunities, and we align that with our DBE program. So our upside is by being an economic development office, also operating the small business program, also by administering the federal program. We leverage our resources and our partnerships. And again, that's one of our saving graces. The idea that we also have an aviation director who's supportive of the program. We have educational and institutional organizations that's willing to commit their resources. And this becomes, as you can imagine, attractive to the business community who recognizes your growth and your opportunity. Because as you know, businesses always speak to, do I have access to that employer, to that employee? Do I have access to that individual who has the skill set as well as the interest? So it's through our collaboration and our partnerships, we've been able to have some success in growing new businesses, which also introduce opportunities for our DBEs to participate.
That's great. That's really helpful. I appreciate that. And according to my personal timer, I'm out of time, and I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
I note this this term, trickle-down effect. It seems to me that's very important to hear. We're talking about engineering, where minorities and women have not participated in nearly the numbers they do in other professions. So the notion that this encourages minorities and women to even enter the profession, it seems to me, should be encouraging to this committee. Pleased to recognize Representative Woodall at this time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I wanted to start with Dr. Wainwright. I appreciated his likening our challenges to blood pressure medication, and we certainly don't want to end blood pressure medication. I wanted to find out, Dr. Wainwright, if you saw anything in your research that helped us on the pathway to a cure. I've heard lots of concerns about graduating from the program. I've heard lots of concerns about the impact of categorical exclusions. At the end of the day, the DBE program was intended to be a step towards a cure. Do you see anything that could help us alter the program in ways that alleviate some of the fears of graduation and bring us closer to that societal cure?
Thank you, Representative. Couple things. One is, I'm not a policy guy as much as a statistical guy, so I'm not sure I can speak about what detailed improvements in the DBE program might get to the cure, as you're mentioning. But as Chairman DeFazio mentioned at the beginning, one of the touchstones for me would be to see greater spillover of efforts like the DBE program, like the state and local MWB programs, into the private sector, which, as I mentioned, is about 80% of the economic activity. So the DB program at its best is affecting a fraction of 20% that the public sector controls, and still more, we're talking today just about the transportation sector. In the 37 years that the program has been in effect, we are starting to see some of that, but it's still a long, long way off. But the day, when I started working on this in 1989, you never heard of the term of a supplier diversity officer at a public agency, let alone a private agency. So there's a demonstration effect, I think, to see and then to witness the positive effects that this program has on many of the witnesses you have here today, business owners. Hopefully that has a demonstration effect into the private sector and will encourage more private companies to diversify their supply chains and their contracting and procurement chains. And when that day comes, I may be getting off my blood pressure medicine at some point down the road from that. So that's a great question. Thank you.
I thank you for that, Dr. Wainwright. I think it was Ms. Norman who mentioned that one of the side effects of that blood pressure medication could just be creating a checkbox program. Ms. Norman, I kind of heard that from Ms. Liddell's testimony that she'd done amazing work, built amazing relationships, and as soon as she was excluded from the program, all of that hard work disappeared because those folks were not prioritizing her relationships or her quality work. They were focused on getting that checkbox done. Could you speak a little bit more about your concern that it is turning into a checkbox program, and maybe some ideas about how we can solve that so that these relationships and these good work ethics can be continued?
Sure. So while I don't want to just say it's a checkbox, in essence it is, but without it, sir, they would not get these opportunities. So it is very important to have that, to have these demonstrated goals, requirements, not just an aspiration, but a requirement to make sure that part of the process that the DBEs and women-owned businesses get that fair opportunity to bid and compete and win those contracts. The other part that can assist with that, as Virginia, we have what they call the Virginia Small Business Enterprise Program, and that allows us to debundle some of these contracts on the construction side of the house and the professional services side of the house, $750,000 or less, or up to $1 million, looking at those projects to see for a subcontractor to then step into the arena of being a prime. So a lot of times these small businesses forget that they started, the larger businesses forget that they started out as a small business as well. However, we've been fortunate on the construction side of the house. We still have some work to do on the professional services side of the house of identifying those kinds of projects. So while we say it's a checkbox, without that check, these small business, women-owned businesses would not have that opportunity.
Well, thank you
I
very
certainly
much.
recognize that. To Chairwoman Norton's point, when we have our next hearing on this topic, it hurts to hear the fears of graduating from the program. Graduation should be something that we're aspiring to, and so I hope we will be able to make some changes, explore some ways to make that a more comfortable transition. Chairwoman, thank you for your indulgence. I yield back.
If I could,
I thank the gentleman for his questions. We hear next from Representative Saris.
Thank you, Ms. Norton, and thank you for the people that are giving testimony today. This is very important. Mr. Ali, thank you very much. My question will be directed to you. I represent a portion of the Newark Airport with my colleague, Don Payne. We both represent the airport. You have said that without the disadvantaged business enterprise programs, some of the contracting opportunities for minorities are gone. Well, as you know, Newark Airport, the new Terminal 1 is being built. And I am and they're probably now going through the process of selecting bids for potential. I am hopeful that minority women-owned businesses, minority-owned Black businesses, and minority Latino businesses get to participate in this process and are able to secure some of these bids. Would you know what percentage of minority women and Latino-owned businesses currently represent airport concessions across the country?
No, sir, I do not have that answer. That's something the statistical guy can tell you, the doctor. I don't have all that stats
So
across.
you won't know anything about New Jersey either, right?
No, sir, I'm sorry. Not about specific in general. No, sir.
Well, I think it would help if there'd be some data about how many small businesses, how many minority business are participating in these airports. Because we don't know if there are enough, or there are too many, or there are not enough.
Yes,
So
sir.
I don't know who would put those statistics together.
Yes, sir, Congressman. I believe that the FAA should be able to provide you with that information, sir, as well as the DOT Department, Office of Civil Rights.
So I'm going to get my staff on that because I am very concerned that this new wing that we have in Newark, this Terminal 1, that the minorities get their fair share of concessions in that new wing.
Yes, sir.
What role do you think that the DBE program plays in the recovery of businesses like yours with this pandemic, how it has impacted?
Sir, the businesses that we represent, I will tell you that the COVID has adversely affected businesses in that they have been able to have to deal with most of the contracts for ACDBs have been secured against contracts with the airports. And those airports have used that contracting to get rents, and those rents and those payments all go to pay for bonding and other things inside of the airport and aviation business. So when you have a slowdown in traffic and those ACDBs are no longer able to get passengers to pay their facility charges or their costs, it becomes a really critical role of making sure that we have the ACDBs involved, but they also lose out when the airport industry is inhibited by the lack of passengers.
And have you noticed where there's big investment in airports across the country where they take the minority business are able to take part after such investments in some of these airports, or do you feel that maybe they're cast out someplace?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. I do believe that you've offered in your funding to these airports, you've offered the opportunity for them to share that with their concessionaires and the ACDBs. It's my understanding that each airport has the authority to make a determination of how much they will share or if they will share. I think each area would need to be audited for their particular concern. So if you're interested in New Jersey or New York, I think you should ask if the resources that you provide for them, how much of that were they able to share with the ACDBs?
Yeah, I am concerned about New Jersey and New York, but quite frankly, I am concerned about the rest of the country also, because there's big investment in some of these airports, and I would like to see minority-owned business not be cast out because, well, you know how it works.
We've heard from our members that there has not been shared prosperity with those resources. Those resources have not necessarily been shared. So members have asked airport directors and airport authority members to share and find resources. I know of a particular case out west where an ACDBE constituency group was concerned that a major airport got a lot of resources, but those resources have not been shared. As a result, his business, which is a multi-million-dollar business, may have to come back to the city council and ask for additional funding because the airport did not share in the resources that to help him stay in business.
Well, if I could ever be of service to
Thank you
the
very
minority
much.
business groups, thank you.
We hear the next question is from Representative Carol Miller.
Thank you, Acting Chairwoman Norton. With some of your comments that you made earlier, the thought came into my mind about how grateful I am that over the last few years, our educators are focusing more on STEAM and STEM education, which will give the opportunity to all our children, the little girls, the minority children, the opportunity to learn what they need in order to have some of these businesses like mother-daughter engineering. And thank you all of you for being here today as witnesses. I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear from the stakeholders that do represent DBEs and ACDBEs. The initials are still kind of hard for me. As these organizations attempt to cultivate their businesses, it's important that we continue to monitor discrimination so that we can continue to build and expand on this program to allow for fair and equal opportunities to have access. Mr. Ali, could you please speak about the difference between direct and indirect discrimination and what your suggestions would be so that we could ensure that minority-owned businesses are properly represented?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. I think it's important that you strengthen the program in the way you evaluate it and open up opportunities. Direct discrimination is organizations making the determination that they really are not going to have inclusion. They say they will have inclusion. I will tell you an example of a time I was at an airport directors meeting and someone indicated that they were going to do maybe 5% with minorities and try to do another 5% to get to the 10%. And I indicated back with them at the meeting, well, then maybe we'll try to sign your contract. The attitudes changed really quickly. Within 48 hours, they were able to attain the other 5% to make sure they had the 10%. So to really enforce the utilization of good faith effort and inclusion is going to be important. Some of the other issues around institutional discrimination are really cultural, and a lot of that has to be really developed through organizations and sometimes through policy, where people are not really allowing ACDBEs or DBEs to come to the table, where they may put them inside of a contract, as you heard from earlier testimony, but not have them actually really participate and grow their business so that they can be able to not just be airport side, they can grow their business to be on the public sector, the private sector side that would help them to get to the 80% level. So this is truly not just a groundbreaking way to get minorities and women into the transportation industry, but a lot of them use this and catalyze this and leverage this opportunity to be able to go to the private side, which allows them to really grow their business and, as you would say, graduate, but to really bifurcate their portfolio so they can diversify it long enough so they can be able to build sustainable businesses.
Thank you so much. Mr. McDonald, following the COVID-19 pandemic, Broward County has had to adjust and adapt their business practices to help the DBEs stay on their feet. Could you speak to how Broward County utilized current resources to prepare the DBEs for the pandemic? Did the county use the funds to prepare the DBEs for the pandemic or to help them respond to the pandemic?
Thank you for that question, a good question. We actually did both. We were able, based on our programming and our activity, and specifically projects, because we had already scheduled some projects with aviation, and we had some other county projects that also spoke to transit relevant to our DBE activity that we already had funds for. So when we recognized the troubles of COVID, one of the things that the commission had moved forward was to make sure that projects that were aligned with dollars, we could still continue those projects. But in the meantime, as we also look forward to rolling those projects out, we made sure on the economic development side of our office that we also gave all of the necessary hand-holding as our DBEs and other small businesses, minority and women, were looking to identify if they could qualify for PPP, EIDL, our original state bridge loan program. We also made sure that we worked closely with our Miami office of the Small Business Administration to take other additional resources that have always been available and make sure that those virtual workshops were in front of all of our DBEs. And where we are right now, we're beginning to roll out projects and activities that we again have the funding for. And since aviation traffic, as one example, is still slow, some of the projects that our airport director was looking to do, we can now start those projects, we can begin to align those goals, and we can have a way for our DBEs to participate. So we were able to at least juggle some opportunities on the front end, use projects the county had already committed as a way to stabilize some of our DBEs, as well as to rejuvenate our economy through those projects. But more importantly, it did take time to make sure that those where projects may not be available were able to take advantage of those federal funds and other financial resources that were available.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time has expired. I want to call next on Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses present. Let me say that this is my 28th year on this committee, and this is the most prevailing concern that has been expressed to me around the country since I've been a member of this committee, most especially with my own area. It was one of the first issues that I started working on when I came to this committee. Secretary LaHood, who came from this committee, who to become Secretary of Transportation, worked with us on language in order to make sure that when the language was put in the RFPs, there would be some sanctions if they weren't followed. What we've gotten since we put this in place is a lot of RFPs that included minorities, but never got them involved once they got the RFP. I have been visited with women, minority women from all over this country complaining about that. He helped us come up with language, but we could not get Chairman Micah to support it at the time. So, and I noticed that there's still overwhelming evidence of discrimination. And really, when we first started looking at this, there were companies that were putting the name of the company into the spouse's name in order to get Anglo women qualified. And so all of that has been experienced. And I really have a great interest in fairness and opportunity with it. So I've heard great testimony. I appreciate everyone being here, but I want to know from the witnesses, when these RFPs are sent out and the minority participation is dictated, have you experienced any reason to believe that it is a serious effort to include minorities? Let me start with Mr. McDonald.
Thank you for the question. I believe that, to your point, and you've certainly been at it longer than I have, but you're 100% correct. The language that was put in, it's my job as the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Liaison Officer to make sure, in working with aviation and or transit, when those RFPs cross our desk, I have to make sure that that language is there that even supersedes that good faith effort. I have to make sure that there's languages that's not impediments or hurdles to the minority. So yes, I do believe there's been situations as the agencies prepare their RFPs that language that supports DBE is silent, and those things that would give opportunities to override the program are present. But it is the responsibility of individuals like myself, UCPs, as we're reviewing these, to catch that and to address that. And I can say, at least in my 7 years here in Broward, especially the last 3 years, and working with my aviation director and my transit director, they've worked with me to assure that their RFPs and with their staff, we are addressing that. But it certainly has happened in the past, no question.
Thank you very much. Mr. McDonald, I've had minority women visit me in Dallas, Texas, from Florida, complaining that their names went into the RFPs, but they never got a call or even a word after the contract was let. Have you heard any reports of that?
Yes, I have. And one of the examples I can explain is that when the DBEs are a part of the process and we do the letters of interest, and the prime has to identify which DBEs they're going to be working with. As you can imagine, most primes go out and find 5 or 6 to try to reach that 10, 15, or 20% goal. When they submit their RFP, they have to identify specifically which of the DBEs they're going to use. It's that review that we do, and what we've started doing is asking our agency, but the primes, notify the non-DBEs or the non-minorities that you're not going to use. but we require that they submit who they're actually going to use as a part of the bid, and as a part of our posting, we list that. So it is true that a prime would have 5 or 6 to try to reach their goal, but they only need 2 or 3, and it's the 2 or 3 they submit on the bid we hold them to. But yes, the other ones should be notified that they weren't used, but we definitely record minority and women and the participation.
Thank you very much. I have heard from my own city, the DART, which is the Dallas Area Rapid Transit, that they have no power to insist that the RFP that was selected include what they have in their contract, that they cannot enforce the fact that they have named the minority firm and then they don't hire them. Do you have difficulty looking at the language to see whether or not there's enforcement language there? Because it's not being done in Dallas, Texas. And I just wonder if any of you have any experience with saying that the hands are tied of the local authorities, but not sticking with the contract once it is let. Mr. Ali. Unmute.
Yes, ma'am, Congresswoman, I apologize. I'm not aware of any situation where I've heard many stories like you've heard from Mr. McDonald of contracts like that, but I'm not aware of any specific situation where that has occurred. I've had members express this to me. I've not been witness to any of the information on it.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady's time has expired. Representative Babin.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of you for giving your time to participate as witnesses today. And I appreciate the work that went into setting up today's hearing. However, I think we can all agree that the Department of Transportation Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program is a very important program, and one that is overwhelmingly and bipartisanly supported here in Congress. And to suppose that anyone on this committee feels otherwise, I think would be misleading and politically motivated. And with that said, I will keep this short. Every single day that focuses on identity politics is a day that we are not focusing on finding solutions to very real problems. Problems like a debilitating national debt, a porous southern border where our interstates and our highways are being used to transport millions of tons of deadly drugs into our country, a port system that today is being used to facilitate the real institution of modern-day slavery, and that is human trafficking. All of these issues and more deserve our full attention. But we are here using our time and resources celebrating a program that is already supported by the Trump administration, by congressional Democrats and Republicans. I'm not saying that this program is not worthy at all. It's certainly worthy of our attention, but much the opposite, as we heard from Mrs. Boyer's testimony earlier today. And that as long as we emphasize identity politics, we can expect to see more division, more exclusion. We are one America, folks, all sexes, all races, all creeds, and identity politics is dividing us and in many ways keeps vulnerable communities oppressed through perceived grievances and resentment. The American dream has produced prosperity and liberty, without a doubt, but some here maintain that it has increased inequality, and we are seeing the consequences of that right now all across this great land and nation of ours. My earnest prayer is that we could come together and effectively address the many issues within our committee's jurisdiction that are not getting the attention that they deserve. I'd like to thank you, Madam Chair, and I will yield back.
The gentleman yields back. This is an oversight hearing, and we have an obligation to do oversight, especially since we have just passed. One of the few bills to pass this time has been the Transportation Infrastructure Bill. I'm pleased to recognize Representative Hank Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This country is born out of the soil of racism. Slavery is what built this country, free labor off the backs of Black people. For 250 years, Black people were enslaved in this country, and then for 100 years thereafter, we had Jim Crow apartheid imposed upon us. And then to say that in the 401-year history, we should now consider Black businesses to compete on the same playing field, starting from the same starting point as white businesses, some of which have been in existence in this country since, for 200-300 years. To say that those Black businesses must compete with those white businesses from a level playing field, it's impossible. And that's why affirmative action has always been necessary. And as it was said earlier today, if you've got high blood pressure and you take medication for it, just because your medication has produced equilibrium, does not mean that you stop taking the medication. So that's where we are in this country with the DBE program. And Mr. Ali, in response to Congressman Larson's question, you revealed some of the specific challenges that airport DBEs are grappling with to survive during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Are there any other challenges that minority airport concessionaires currently face that you want to bring to our attention? And are there any foreseeable challenges that DBEs are likely to face as they seek to compete in a post-pandemic recovery?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I think it's important that we either focus on the short-term issues of, the underwriting requirements. The constraints of what's making the private sector investment in these public assets. I mean, you don't have the same type of collateral. You can't pledge the same kind of assets. You can't give people the same sort of security interest in the underlying assets of your business when you're doing this work. And so the crippling effect of there's a quote that when one community gets a cold, the other one gets pneumonia. I would say the other one may be getting COVID, and it's a slow kill. So it becomes quintessential that in these public-private partnerships that we're able to find resources like with the SBA in the EIDL loan program or the Main Street lending program, that there's some attention to not just providing resources for airports, but providing resources for the ACDBEs to be able to get maybe MAG abatement or minimal guaranteed fees abated. Right now, there's currently a $3.5 billion proposal in the Senate bill, which will include relief for concessionaires, and we're hoping that will be addressed maybe in the bill for the CR.
Thank you. Ms. Boyer, in your testimony, you argued for a national DBE certification process as opposed to the current process, which adheres to a state-by-state certification process. You contend that the 50-state certification process serves as an additional and unnecessary barrier to competition that women and minority-owned businesses already face. Do you have anything else to tell us about the difficulties that the 50-state DBE certification process poses to your company's ability to grow and compete? And do you believe that the 50-state certification process was put into place as an intentional barrier?
No, I certainly don't think it was an intentional barrier. Until something is lived, we have no idea to understand, what the challenges are with it. So I think the program that was put in place was a great start, but because of the challenges that we've had, it's just bared to light that we don't have the same opportunities as large companies that are more nimble, that can cross state lines. And when we develop a relationship with a large engineering firm, let's say, that uses our expertise, they want us to be their partners, and we both together have a better ability to win projects by moving from state to state. It's just that they can just move state to state and get a business license. We have to get a business license and then start a certification process. And then on top of it, we have to get a pre-qualification with the state that we're going to. So just to have that nimbleness of a unified DBE certification in the 50 states, I think it just takes a little bit of the challenge away. And any layer of challenge that we can eliminate just helps all of us.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, your company is certified in many areas, and one of your strengths has been that you are able to provide transit market research. In your company's work and research, have you uncovered disparities in transit availability and equity that perhaps larger private companies overlook? And what factors enable DBEs to be uniquely positioned to provide transit data that most affects underrepresented communities or communities facing transit inequity? And would a greater presence of DBEs on transit projects result in reducing transit inequity in underrepresented communities, underrepresentative communities?
Wow, that was a tall order. I'm going to try to remember the question. One of the things you mentioned, transit market research. So we know that transit agencies typically service 70% of their riders may come from low income or disadvantaged or underrepresented neighborhoods. What has helped us in the transit market research business is the ability to go out and talk to these folks to gather the information that's necessary for transit systems to make great decisions on routes and how they're serving their public. Being a minority firm and doing the market research, typically we hire people that look like us, so we're able to connect. One of the things that wasn't mentioned here is on the IDIQ and task order type contracts. A lot of times what's happening these days is that you see a lot of these type contracts where you are included in the team. And I hear the bell, your number is never pulled. So you're with a big firm, you're on the team, but because it's a task order contract, they'll just tell you your services were never required or never came up. And I've lost a lot of business on just that.
The gentleman's time has expired. I want to call next on Representative Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really appreciate the opportunity here. A very important discussion, obviously, as a business owner myself and my wife, a small business owner. I do understand the value of this and support the cause. Just going back to a statement that I believe Ms. Boyer made, it may have been Ms. Lerdahl that made this statement as well. The frustrations with a formal mentorship program. I've been in several mentorship programs that are frustrating because they end up creating more work and more bureaucracy, and it sometimes slows us down while the intent is to help us speed up. I would just encourage a more informal mentorship program or network of mentors and mentees to where you can connect folks within industry to help each other out and synergize as much as possible. I know that's probably beyond the reach of any one of your charters or even the DBE's charter, but I think that'll pay off huge dividends if we can figure out how to get these sort of informal mentorships in motion and make those connections happen for the various folks. My question is somewhat along those lines, but do individual members, do individual business owners have access to a repository of some sort where there's a list of best practices or lessons learned from previous engagements through different agencies and equities that you can point someone in the right direction and just say, hey, when this type of RFP comes out with this sort of turnaround time, this is where we've seen the most success. Contact this agency first, this agency second. I don't know what those solutions would be, you guys would, but is there a database somewhere or some sort of a repository that's made available to folks that can tap into those lessons learned and not make some of the mistakes that we all have made in the past as we navigate these competitions, which is what they are? Is there a place that has the right contact plans, the right capture plans, and sort of the lessons learned from several, probably hundreds of different captures? And I guess, I guess that's directed to Mr. Wainwright, Ms. Boyer, and Ms. Williams as well.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm not sure I'm the perfect person to answer that, but I would think that organizations like those that are represented here today, COMPTO, AMAC, ACCA, that's where people go every year and multiple times a year to network with their colleagues, to share those ideas. They have certification levels for their own people as their trainers, to get better and better at what they know. And I'm sure Ms. Williams, Mr. Ali can speak more to that, but that would be probably the first place I would think where that kind of institutional knowledge is deposited.
And before you jump in, guys, I think my question is it memorialized somewhere? Is it a link or a database somewhere that folks can access and get sort of the uniformity of it, but also the consistency and making sure that everything's actually memorialized?
That I don't know. My guess is it comes. I know in my experience with those associations, every annual meeting I go to, I come away with reams of good, solid information that I didn't have before. Whether it's as easy to get to as a link, I doubt. But Ms. Williams and Mr. Ali may know better about that. Representative, thank you.
This is Eve Williams. In regards to COMPTO, as you mentioned, Mr. Wayne, we have a tremendous amount of outreach and networking. That would be a project for COMPTO to take on, where we had a depository of sorts, a database of sorts that might help the industry standards. One of the things that I intend to do as the incoming chair for APTA, which is the Association of Public Transportation, is to develop such a database. And we've talked about it a number of times, and to become more of a resource for small and disadvantaged businesses, so they can be able to reach out and get information on how to do certain things. These are and type of work that come up for people to do, to actually have. They're so different. Each proposal is so different. And until somebody comes up with a question, there's typically not an answer. But in APTA, we do have industry standards that and with TCRBP have a lot of things that are available to our members, as well as COMPTO as well.
Okay, thank you. I see I'm out of time. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll hear next from Representative Maloney. Representative Maloney, are you muted? We will pass on then to Representative Brownlee. Representative Brownlee. Are you muted? Then we will go to Representative Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I start, I can't help but comment on one of my colleagues, two gentlemen prior to me on the other side of the aisle, referencing identity politics. Well, on a topic such as this, and I appreciate the chairwoman pointing out our oversight duties, which is the bottom line. It just appears that one of the reasons that we're in this situation are statements and opinions such as that. So the good old boys network is still in place. Let's see. Mr. Ali, what tools do the Airport Minority Advisory Council organization use airports on runway side and the horizontal vertical side of civil builders? Airports.
I'm not sure that the question was received. Did you receive the question? Part of it was.
No, ma'am, I did not see the question.
Could I ask Representative Payne to repeat the question? Representative Payne, part of the question was not heard by us or by the gentleman you asked to respond. So could you repeat your question again? You may be muted. Could you unmute Representative Payne?
Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mr. Ali, what tools do the Airport Minority Advisory Council organization use to get more DBE contractors ready for work at airports on the air, runway sides, and the horizontal and vertical side of civil buildings? Can the federal government play a stronger role in developing more industry contractors at airports?
Thank you, Congressman. Before COVID, we had lots of training and development that we did face-to-face at our annual conference when we talked around service delivery as well on the construction side and the service side. During the pandemic side, we've moved to webinars to be able to facilitate some of that training. As you can imagine, certain contracts in construction for the DB program, but a lot of that is your social networks. And so those social networks in business allow for people to participate more readily than others. So we recognize that. So we try to make sure we do matchmaking with the larger contractors, with the people that we may have in our database so they can have some great opportunities. We also have regional directors throughout the region, throughout the country, so that they can align and find themselves to do more partnerships with that. And as you continue to move forward, I think if you were looking at ways to for the federal government to create policies that would be important or impactful, is how do we look at PFCs in the future? As we know, a lot of the funding has moved from AIP funding to PFC funding, is to ensure that the DBE regulation as you go forward will have also include PFC dollars. As many people can tell you here, if the AIP dollars, airport improvement dollars have the DBE program, the PFCs, which the passenger facility fees charges, do not have the DBE grant assurances. So as a result, I believe you'll start seeing a diminishing of utilization of DBEs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Let's see. Mr. McDonald, We've heard positive things about Broward County's funded capital construction program. What type of success have you had with providing work to local DBE firms, and can your program plan be implemented in other areas?
One, counting our territories in terms of median income. My entire
Thank you.
Who?
Continue, please.
Oh, boy. Thank you. Mr. McDonald, should MWDBE participation in your program plan require third-party determination and sign-off before majority primes sign contracts with DBE inclusion?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. Yes, our program can be duplicated. Again, running an economic development and a small business office and administering a federal program, we understand the importance from my local small businesses all the way to my DBEs where they need the additional assistance. So one of the things that we do, similar to what Mr. Ali just shared, we do as many meet and greets, whether purchasing does pre-bids or not. During COVID and pre-COVID, we did free meetings, or what we call meet and greets, as possible to assure that from an agency perspective, we speak to the DBEs about all the opportunities that are on the rise. From potential prime perspective, we call them in as potential primes and explain the program and the expectancy of the office. As mentioned earlier to one of the speakers, we actually do have a requirement as a part of that LOI. Whoever you submit, you are married to, unless it goes through a process of my office and my final signature, that there's a reason to substitute. So it's the idea that the program tries to enforce exactly what 49 CFR requires us to do. It's the idea that I do have the support of the county commission, the county administrator, and my agencies that support the bid all the way to the utilizations of the primes. And we do believe that as a model, and nothing's perfect, I'm not acting as if it is, but we do believe as a model, there's an opportunity to empower primes to recognize that this requirement is one that we also want, as you've heard, to develop and nurture those relationships. We were given an example a few years ago to not set a goal just to see. I refused. I knew that without the goal, they wouldn't do it. So we are crystal clear. I just had a primes meeting last month, a virtual, to let them know that this is not only a requirement, it's also monitored and reported, and we will act on it. So it really requires us to do what the law allows us to do.
Thank you very much, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. I thank you. Representative Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Boyer, in 2013, the Office of Inspector General issued a report saying that there were DBE firms that were deliberately limiting the amount of new contract dollars in order to stay eligible for the program. Do you think that that is harmful to those programs? And I'll explain why I ask this in a moment. Is she still with us?
Yes, I am. I do think it's harmful to the program. I believe that the program is about empowering firms to get a start, get a lot of experience, and be able to step out and perform on a level playing field. I think it's the fear that overcomes a small business to step out, because it is that, we hear so often that if there's not a DBE goal, then we're going to do it ourselves. So I think it's a fear, and I just think there needs to be more of a ladder in between.
Well, the reason I bring this up and the possibility that there needs to be some term limits for how long you can stay in the program is you made another point earlier about lacking the nimbleness that larger firms have. And isn't that largely a function of resources, your undercapitalized cash flow issues, that you don't have the nimbleness that the other firms have?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's nimbleness when it comes to being able to move to opportunities. I think within our company, we're able to move fairly quickly, but we are mostly undercapitalized. It's very difficult to get capital, and it takes years and years. So my company's only 16 years old, so it takes years and years to get to a point where you can, you can sustain yourself.
My point about this is that I'm kind of odd in my reading choices, where some people read novels. I tend to read reports. But there was a report from the Federal Reserve Bank, I think one from St. Louis and one from Atlanta, that talked about how minority-owned and women-owned businesses are undercapitalized. And one of the things that I think we need to do to address this situation is to follow on what President Trump's done with the opportunity zones, and maybe do a broader version of that incentivizes financial institutions to work with minority-owned and women-owned businesses to help them to get to a stronger position in terms of available capital, which will help address this nimbleness issue that you raised. But I think it's also important in the DBE program that we not incentivize companies that are in that program to stay in that program, because you'll never grow. And I would just like your thoughts on that, and maybe Mr. Wainwright weigh in on that as well.
Sure. So, I mean, it would help to have the financial institutions more on board in helping minority and women-owned businesses. I mean, it's definitely something that holds most people back. For me, our company always, kids that were in the basement of the bank, they always ask, is there a man that's, involved in your decision making? And we've been building a successful business and doing well, being run by women. So
your answer
I
is
do think it would help.
Your answer is you don't need no stinking man.
In collaboration and yes, in support.
You just need a good banker.
And good bankers are hard to find for women and minorities. I mean, we know that the banking industry, it's always a challenge. It really is. I mean, right now I'm using a very small bank from my hometown, not even in the state that I'm working in, because of the personal relationships. They know my family, they know my brothers and sisters, and they trust me.
Madam Chairman, I know we're in the midst of a highly partisan election, but I think what we need to at least give some credit to the Trump administration on the opportunity zones. We need to think about how we expand this to make more capital available to minority-owned and women-owned businesses. And I would recommend that our colleagues look at these reports from the Federal Reserve banks and start thinking about how at some point we can work together to address this. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his suggestion. And as he notes, this is a very bipartisan committee, and this issue is very bipartisan. So I believe the chairman will take note of what you have asked astutely. Representative Plaskett. Are you muted? Representative Plaskett, who is next? Then we'll move to Representative Carbajal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Wainwright, today we've heard business owners tell us they believe discrimination would prevent them from being successful in business in the absence of this program. Statistical analysis can shed further light on the question by comparing situations where a DBE program is in effect with situations in the same jurisdiction the program is not in effect. Do you agree, and do you believe doing that provides useful evidence? And if so, what does the evidence you have reviewed demonstrate?
Thank you, Representative. We've heard from Ms. Lerdahl about what's happened in Washington DOT, the overwhelming majority of examples of so-called parity that I'm familiar with are quite recent, and as some DBE programs have matured and programs like them. In my experience, they're rarely statistically significant, which means they don't necessarily show parity at all, which is what we learned with the subsequent disparity study that was performed by Washington DOT, despite US DOT ignoring those results when the request to rescind the waiver came in. But second, these results, in the rare instances that they occur, are statistically significant in a context in which availability figures have been artificially depressed due to discrimination. You remember I testified that minority and women-owned firms are forming at much lower rates than similarly situated majority firms because of discrimination. If such firms were forming at the same rate as majority male firms, there would be few, if any, findings of parity. Third, you really shouldn't consider a category of DBE to have achieved parity until you've seen the same result appear consistently in the private sector, that is in the census data. Again, this is like the blood pressure metaphor I've used previously. Remember, the only markets in which there's been any attempt to level the playing field are the public contracting markets, like the federally assisted transportation market. In the far larger and more lucrative private sector, DBE programs are rare to non-existent, and majority male-owned firms generally get almost all of the business. We also have to remember that majority male-owned firms have literally had centuries to grow and establish their firms with effectively zero competition from minorities and women. Early on, the lack of competition was a direct result of laws that intentionally and explicitly disadvantaged women and minorities. Later, it was the result of discriminatory practices that were permitted to continue despite civil rights laws. Finally, we should consider the practical effects of suspending the operation of the program every time some subcategory of program participant achieves a modicum of success. This won't reduce discrimination. It will just tend to increase bankruptcies, as we've heard so poignantly from Ms. Leardahl. And then those same entrepreneurs or others like them will need to be added right back into the program.
Thank you. Dr. Wainwright, this committee has received reports that some state and local transportation agencies have excluded certain minority, ethnic, or gender groups from their programs because these groups have finally reached or exceeded quote unquote parity, according to a disparity study. Do you believe excluding from the program certain groups who've reached some measure of parity in the market is the right approach?
No, it's not, and I believe that was what I would just address my previous response to. So maybe I misunderstood your initial question.
Thank you. I have limited time, so Ms. Lardell, you stated in your testimony that after being excluded from the DBE program, you bid on several contracts, but were unsuccessful. To your knowledge, did those contracts go to other DBEs?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. No, absolutely not. They went to large electrical companies that were not DBE firms. And in fact, our experience in the state of Washington was when the waiver was enacted, prior to that, the DBE community had about 17% participation. And after the waiver was enacted, that fell to about 8% or 8.5% participation, approximately. So those DBE dollars didn't go to other DBE firms. They actually went to the prime contractors who self-performed that work.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Graves. And thank you, Representative Carvajal. We now go to Representative Graves.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Witnesses, I want to thank you very much for your testimony and participation today. First question is for Mr. Ali. Mr. Ali, in the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill, we changed the size standard for DBEs in the legislation in regard to FAA DBE participation. I'm just curious if you have any reflection or reaction to that law change and how it might have caused an impact on DBE contracts within the aviation space.
Yeah, I think it was good that we had, in regards to that position, you start looking at that we had to have the size standard to equal the SBA. I mean, that helped with DBEs because some of the size standards were not working, they were not equivalent. So we really appreciate the committee has done and argued for this inclusion of this kind of moving forward act, we thought.
Thank you. I want to first ask Ms. McDonald and perhaps Ms. Norman. Our State Department of Transportation in Louisiana has indicated that some of their success in growing DBE participation has been the result of these community partnerships that they've helped to establish and sort of create a larger market within the DBE community for some of the contractors that to be able to hit their DBE goals. Have you all established any type of partnerships or any other strategies that have resulted in increasing DBE participation?
I would say that we have. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea that we extend that same olive branch to our primes that I do with my DBEs. I actually hold virtual workshops now during COVID, but prior meet and greets with the primes to make sure that they understand the county's program, they understand the federal program, they understand our expectation, and certainly we want to entertain any questions or concerns they may have historically had with our DBEs. We also then do the same with the primes and the DBE. The model I'm trying to describe is that the more we know about the project prior, the more we extend the information to the DBE community as well as the prime community before the bid ever comes out, helps to build the relationship so that they understand the county is serious about the federal program. We are going to adhere to the 49 CFR regulations, and that's not against the prime. That's just making sure that the prime understands that it's a commitment for our greater economy to use our minority and women, and yes, to allow our minority and women as DBEs to get in front of our primes early for the pre-qualifiers. So that's one of the things that we do on a regular basis to try to assure that who the prime married themselves to as a DBE, they maintain them, and also to let us know if we're having challenges with our DBEs so that we can continue to try to develop them. So we do the collaboration regularly.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Norman, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
Yeah, same here. We do collaboration opportunities with our primes. We also have what we call the TDAC. It is the DBE Transportation Advisory Committee. It's where the DBEs come together along with the primes. They have their president, their vice president, secretary, and treasurer. We meet quarterly. Out of that, they build relationships. Every year we hold what we call a DBE symposium, where we bring in primes, where we bring in DBEs who have graduated from the program, where we also have, at the end of the workshop, we have what we call a matchmaking event so that we can match some of the DBEs with the primes, some of the scope of work opportunities. And so we do that often. We also seek out, as someone talked about earlier, mentorship programs, partnering with large firms that's in the tolling industry, where there's not a lot of DBEs who have that skill set, partnering with those kinds of agencies to build the capacity for our DBE firms. So it is about partnership and it is about collaboration.
Thank you, Ms. Norman. Thank you, and Mr. McDonald. Last question, I'm going to kind of bring those two together. So years ago, I ran a large infrastructure program, and often we'd meet with DBEs that wanted more work. The type of work that we did in some cases was a very specialized area. And so we'd be sitting there with contracts of tens of millions or maybe even hundreds of millions. And as you can understand, somewhat cautious or concerned about giving a contract to a firm that maybe doesn't have that resume or that portfolio of expertise in the field. You've both talked about partnerships and mentoring programs. So on the one hand, we've eliminated the gross receipts cap in the FAA. The HR2, the highway bill that's moving through, also eliminates that nearly $24 million gross receipts cap. I'm trying to figure out, how do you strike that right balance of not giving contracts to folks that don't have the right expertise, but at the same time don't allow these huge contracts to slide in under a DBE label whenever they're taking work from smaller businesses. Ms. Boyer, do you want to comment on that at all?
I think one of the things that we've done in Illinois for the Illinois Department of Transportation is that we do a lot of teaming between small firms and large firms, and that seems to really work well. It gives the small firms able to lead the project, but it has the support of the larger firms that have the breadth of experience and really a workforce that can help us out when we need the extra manpower. So I think joint venturing and teaming opportunities between prime and DB firms is really important. I think it's a way to advance us all, because what it also does is the prime firm learns, or the bigger firm learns, how to be a sub. They learn that information needs to flow up and down, and sometimes if they never have the opportunity to work as a sub consultant or a subcontractor, they never understand the importance of passing on information in a timely manner. They don't even have any idea what it's like to be a DB firm. So I think overall it strengthens the entire industry.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for his question. Representative Stanton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. As people on the committee know, I'm a new member to Congress. My former job was mayor of a large city, mayor of the city of Phoenix, and I am a huge fan of the DBE program. I witnessed with my own eyes when we were lucky enough to do a large infrastructure program at our airport, or advance light rail in my city, or build a water treatment plants, the opportunity to get businesses, often small businesses, led by women, led by people of color, an opportunity to get a portion of that work and see them build their companies, grow employment, build their own wealth, is really great for the city. And a benefit of this program also that I witnessed over and over again is that the DBE firm leadership often would become the leadership of the city. I would tap, as those companies grew in size and importance in our community, I would tap the leadership of those companies for important boards and commissions or nonprofit board seats, et cetera. They tend to be some of the most civically active business leaders in a community. The DBE program, it's critically important to opening the door for small businesses owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals to compete for important federally funded projects. Today I want to highlight just one DBE success story in Arizona. Arizona Heat Contracting, a woman-owned DBE company, had only one contract with our state DOT prior to joining the South Mountain Freeway team, the largest project to date in Arizona at almost $2 billion. The company was contracted to perform trucking activities on this new 22-mile freeway. The original contract was for $25,000. That was just the start. The company did well and kept growing and growing, got him new contracts, ultimately got contracts valued up to $9 million. And then they were able to subcontract with over 81 DBE and non-DBE trucking firms to assist in delivering the main portion of the project's trucking needs. That's a great success story. They were successful in maintaining ownership and control of the trucking operations on a project which had an aggressive schedule and many requirements. Arizona Heat was able to quickly adapt and take the necessary steps in a very short period of time in order to sustain the needs of the project, increase its capacity. I mean, that story is played out over and over and over again in communities throughout this country. It's just one example of many, how successful the DBE program has been in my state and has been in so many other states. I have a question for Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams, the committee recently enacted a provision which was included in H.R. 2, the Moving Forward Act, to remove the gross receipts cap under the DBE provisions applicable to the Surface Transportation Program. If enacted, certified DBEs would be eligible to participate in federally funded highway and transit projects based upon their Small Business Administration size standard, as is the case in aviation DBE program. Ms. Williams, how would such a change benefit certified DBEs seeking to participate on highway and transit projects?
Thank you. That's a great question. I think it will help if those caps were lifted. However, many times the problem for graduating, or the problem that exists that pushes people out of the program, is not the cap on gross receipts. It's the cap on personal net worth. If I don't have the personal net worth to go after a $24 million project, then it doesn't behoove me to go after it. I don't have the resources to fund it. And so I think a greater emphasis should be put on looking at the personal net worth cap as well.
All right, you've given this committee a lot of food for thought with that good advice. I appreciate that, Ms. Williams. Mr. Ali, how has participation in the DBE and AC DBE programs made AMAC members more competitive outside of the DBE program?
Yeah, thank you for the question. What we found, as you heard earlier, the joint ventures that you heard from Ms. Boyer, those joint ventures and those teaming arrangements you've seen that happen more often. And as a result, they've been able to take some of those partnerships outside of the airport industry into other transportation industry, as well as into the private industry, which allows them to build relationships. We should never forget, business is done with people, people you know, people you like, and people you trust. And that's really done in this space where you get people to engage. So the DBE program kind of helps to align for some of that, particularly since there's been so much discrimination in the past, that this provides a way for people to partner and grow and learn to work and build together so they can do exactly what you said. People get to know who they are and be able to put them on boards and commissions together.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been an excellent, excellent hearing. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Representative Fletcher. Representative Fletcher.
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. And thank you, and also Ranking Member Graves and Chairman DeFazio for holding the hearing today. Thank you so much to the witnesses for taking the time to testify. Your stories have been very powerful. I also want to thank my colleagues for their thoughtful questions and their ongoing support of the important work we are doing here today, especially Mr. Johnson from Georgia, who reminded us all why this program exists and why it matters. As we have heard, the DOT's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program is an important program created to ensure that minority and women-owned businesses have a fair chance to compete for federal DOT funds, a program with historical roots that, as we've heard from our witnesses, is very much needed today. For more than 40 years, the program has opened access to small businesses across the country who would otherwise not be able to compete for many of these projects. And we've seen the results in my hometown, for example. Thanks to this program, more than 30% of both George Bush Intercontinental Airport and William P. Hobby Airport contracting and concessions goes to ACDBEs. But as we've heard today, the committee has an important role in ensuring that the marketplace for DOT-assisted contracts is free from artificial and discriminatory barriers for women and minority-owned businesses who wish to compete on a level playing field. So I want to use my time here today to follow up on a few questions that some of my colleagues have already asked. And I actually want to start with Ms. Williams. In your opening statement, I think the end of your opening statement was interrupted. And so I would like to give you the opportunity to just repeat the concluding sentence, the thing that you wanted to say in conclusion of your opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much. I'll repeat that. So in conclusion, I wanted to say that the program is not a handout, it's a leg up. It forces big companies and public transit agencies or public transportation authorities to do business with minority companies. Without the DBE program, we would probably be out of business at the end of the life cycle of our contracts that are in the pipeline. And my last statement there was that we need to be protected like we protected the bald eagle.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Williams. I did want to hear your full statement, and I want to follow up with you on a particular question, kind of following up on what Chairman DeFazio was asking his questions to Dr. Wainwright about public versus private projects. Can you share with us kind of the percentage of your work or your revenues that comes from public versus private projects, and talk about kind of the effect of the DBE program, public versus private, and how that might help, particularly in the bidding process in Dallas, but also more generally?
Private work is no. We've probably done a few private projects in the past, they tend not to come frequent enough to sustain us. And they also come with other issues that we don't face when we do public work, like getting paid. That's important. As far as the contracts that we do have in the public sector, those have been our lifeline. I think that without those projects, we wouldn't be in business. We just simply wouldn't, because we depend on the DBE program. Would I like to graduate? I would. But as others have mentioned, it's frightening because I know what happens when you pull the covers back. I think sustainability is really important, and sustainability happens when there's continuity between projects, when you're able to retain staff between projects, when the team you've worked with is continuing on to another project together. And so there is a lack of continuity. And what happens is you're forced to lose your resources because you can't send them on the bench. And so this cycle just starts over and over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. And I want to use the remaining time that I have, which isn't a lot, to direct a question to Dr. Wainwright. In your testimony, you stated that statistically significant disparities facing minority-owned and women-owned businesses persist to this day, according to your research. And looking at the disparities, what gaps do you feel your research reveals where the DBE program could be used to further reduce the existing and currently present disparities?
I want to make sure I understand your question, Representative. What more could the DBE program be doing?
Yeah, I mean, do you see gaps? Does your research reveal gaps where the DBE program could be used to further reduce the continuing and existing disparities? And very quickly, I think I've gone over my time here, so.
Yeah, it's kind of a policy question, a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I guess I would say quickly, seeing these programs, there's still a lot of cities and counties and states around the country that don't run comparable programs. And it would be nice if and as well as I might say also within the federal government outside USDOT. So it would be good to see a more consistent and widespread effort to promote contracting diversity in the public sector. And of course, to see that spill over into the private sector.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wainwright. And Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Yeah. I thank the gentlelady for her question. Representative Espaillat. Representative Espaillat, are you muted?
Yes, I'm here.
All right.
How are you?
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to all the panelists for being here. This is an incredibly important hearing. I am grateful to come from a state and a city like New York, which has programs in the transportation and construction sector that go well beyond the requirements of disadvantaged business enterprises. But there are still many underlying issues that I believe we need to address. Last year, I held a meeting with my local transportation task force to discuss better inclusion of DBEs. And we had our local contractors association provide us a thorough explanation to a number of community groups and leaders so they could ensure small businesses in the city have a good sense of how the DBE program works. One of the biggest takeaways from the meeting was that even though New York is full of diversity and has very aggressive diversity goals, there's still a pipeline issue in the construction sector. That is why I'm working closely with former Congressman Charlie Rangel and City College in Manhattan to develop a state-of-the-art infrastructure training program, because we feel that there's just not enough young people, particularly, ready for the potential jobs that may be coming towards the future. So I believe that as we invest in infrastructure, we also need to invest in training a diverse field of candidates for the jobs that will come along the way. Another issue that has been brought up to my attention is the NAICS issue. The NAICS size standard negatively impacts the ability of DBEs to grow. So I wanted to ask the panelists, have you faced similar issues? Do you believe that changes need to be made in HR 2 in the Invest in America Act to sufficiently resolve these issues? And is there more that we can do to ensure that BDEs are not held back? Any other panelists?
This is Eve Williams. I'd like to address the NAICS standards on engineering versus architectural services. And it puzzles me as to why engineering, and that's our main service, the engineering cap on gross revenue is somewhere near $14 million over average 3-year period, but yet architecture services are near $7 million. So I think, in speaking for the architects, I think that they're severely held back because of that NAICS code standard or cap on just architectural services.
Yeah, this is Farad Ali from AMAC. I would say that there needs to be some real evaluation to what Ms. Williams was talking around earlier, which is personal net worth. I think it's reasonable to believe that I think you create some kind of economic discrimination by keeping the numbers so low and then expect for businesses to quote unquote graduate or to perform better. It's hard to continue to have a small net worth and can expect that people can grow to 30 million or 40 million or 15 million. I mean, it's almost unreasonable. That's the problem that we ran into the car rental industry, because you've got a $1.3 million net worth requirement, that standards, that means you can't have over that, but yet you have the cars. If you wanted to be a dealer for rental cars, you got $50 billion of rental cars. If you only have a net worth of 1.3, you can't even get a contract to do that work. So I think there should be some real intensive studies on understanding the impact of keeping the net worth at its current level, on how that's also creating some economic discrimination, until you start really raising that so people can have a growth and share in the prosperity.
Anything on the pipeline issue from anybody? Or do you find that there are not enough trained folks for the jobs that may be coming our way in the future? And what can we do about it?
No, the pipeline actually is an issue, and you're absolutely correct. So we're working here within our state and within our county to expand our apprenticeship program, in addition to what we're trying to do to prepare for DBEs. As a county, we too just decided that we're going to align our own county procurement with apprenticeship, requiring primes to use a percentage of their activities with the contracts they win from the county to be done with apprenticeship. So we're believing that we're going to need to follow that in a similar manner over with the DBE. But the pipeline is an issue that we're trying to address right now, because we do not have enough disciplines as we go forward and infrastructure begins to grow and bloom as opportunities for small businesses.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his question. Representative Garcia. Representative Garcia. Are you muted or are you present? Then I'm going to move on to Representative Cohen. Representative Cohen, are you muted? Then the last member who has not been heard is Representative Carson. Representative Carson, are you muted? I want to thank all of the witnesses for their testimony today. I think this hearing has been very telling and essential. It was particularly essential this year when we are seeing demonstrations over racial discrimination. It's one thing to demonstrate, to take down a Confederate statue that was erected decades ago and be successful at that. It is quite another thing to make sure to raise up the ability of minorities and women to participate in government programs. That's an issue for today and in keeping with the kinds of reckoning that is happening in our country. The comments of our witnesses today have been very helpful. They will be taken into consideration, especially your comments calling for changes in the statute itself. I want to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony, your very informative and helpful testimony. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. If no other members have anything to add, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you very much.